Have you ever sat in the dentist chair, stared at your own x-ray, and just nodded along? You have no clue what you're looking at, but you pretend you do. Well, not anymore. Today, we're going on a decoding mission. We're going to learn the language of that image and understand the story it's telling. Let's get into it.
So you look at a full set of dental x-rays like this one, and yeah, at first glance, it can look pretty intimidating. Kind of like a weird abstract piece of art, right? A whole landscape of shadows and light. But hidden in there is a super detailed story about everything from the tip of your tooth's root to the top of its crown. The real question is, how do we learn to read it? Okay, this right here, this is a Rosetta Stone. It's the key to understanding everything else. And honestly, it's pretty simple. Things that are less dense, like the air in your sinuses, let x-rays pass right through, so they look dark. We call that radiolucent. But things that are really dense, like your tooth enamel or a filling, they block the x-rays and they look bright white. That's radio-opaque. So just remember, dark means less dense, light means more dense. That's it. That's the secret code.
Now, before we can start playing detective and spotting problems, we first need to know what normal looks like. So let's take a quick tour of a healthy mouth, find all the major landmarks, and get our bearings. Think of this as our map for the journey ahead. First stop, the upper jaw, which is called the maxilla. And right above your back teeth, you've got these big, hollow, air-filled spaces. These are your maxillary sinuses. They're a huge, totally normal feature on any x-ray of your upper teeth. And since they're filled with air, which, isn't dense at all, they show up as these big, dark areas on the x-ray. It's the perfect example of a radiolucent structure. Sometimes people see this big, dark space and worry it's a problem. But nope, most of the time, it's just your sinuses saying hello. All right, let's head down to the lower jaw, or the mandible. Running right through it is this super important structure called the mandibular canal. You can think of it as a protected tunnel that carries the main nerve and all the blood supply to your lower teeth. On an x-ray, you'll see this canal as a dark band. But if you look really close, you can often spot two very thin, bright white lines running alongside it. That's the dense bone that makes up the walls of the tunnel. Knowing exactly where this is located is absolutely critical for a dentist planning any work on the lower jaw. Now let's zoom way in and look at just one healthy tooth. It's kind of like a layer cake of different densities. That outer layer, the enamel, it's the hardest, densest substance in your entire body, so it shows up as the brightest white. Right under that is the dentin, which is a little less dense, so it looks more like a grayish white. And then, right in the middle, you have the pulp. That's the living nerve and blood vessels. Not dense at all, so it appears as a dark chamber running down the center.
Okay, so we have our map. We know what a healthy mouth is supposed to look like. Now, let's see what it looks like when things go wrong. We'll start with the more obvious stuff, trauma.
A fracture, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's a break. It can happen in the top part of the tooth, the root, or even the jawbone itself. And it probably won't surprise you to hear that our source material says crown fractures happen most often in the front teeth, while the lower jaw, the mandible, is the jawbone that gets fractured the most. And here's where that first rule we learned comes right back into play. A break creates a tiny bit of space where there used to be solid, dense tooth or bone. And on an x-ray, that little space lets the x-rays pass through, showing up as a sharp, dark line. It's a classic telltale sign of a fracture. But trauma isn't always about breaking things. Sometimes it's about moving them. This is called luxation. So intrusion is when a tooth gets jammed up into the bone. Extrusion is when it gets partially knocked out of the bone. And avulsion? Well, that's the one you really don't want. That's when the tooth gets knocked out completely. The x-ray is key here to help the dentist see what kind of damage has been done to the socket. But a broken or knocked out tooth is often something you can see pretty clearly. The real magic, the real power of x-rays is finding the problems you can't see, the hidden issues lurking just beneath the surface. This is where the real detective work begins. For example, have you ever heard of tooth resorption? It's kind of wild. It's when the body itself starts to break down and absorb its own tooth structure. If it happens from the inside out, that's called internal resorption, you might see a weird, round, dark spot that looks like it's hollowing out the tooth center. If it happens on the outside of the root, external resorption, the tip of the root might start to look kind of blunt or even shorter than it should be. Now, a huge amount of this detective work happens in one very specific spot. The very, very tip of the tooth's root.
The technical term for that tip is the apex. This is a super common area for infections or inflammation to show up in the bone, and we call those periapical lesions.
And what's really fascinating is how the body can react in two totally opposite ways down there. On one hand, you have problems like abscesses or cysts that cause bone loss. They destroy the bone, which creates these dark radiolucent spots on the X-ray. But on the other hand, sometimes the body reacts to a long-term low-grade irritation by building extra bone. It creates a denser area that shows up as a bright white radial pake spot. So the body can either take bone away or add more. And both are huge clues for your dentist.
And get this, here's a cool little tidbit from our source material. That bright white spot of extra dense bone, the one called condensing osteitis, is the single most common radio-opaque thing seen around a root tip in adults. It's just the body's way of building a little fortress of bone to deal with irritation.
So, we've learned the language, we've toured the landmarks, and we've spotted some trouble. But how does a dentist actually take this single black and white image and come up with a final diagnosis? Well, and this is so important to remember. The X-ray is just one piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole story. As you can see here, the X-ray is the initial clue. But then your dentist adds context by actually looking in your mouth, and they get the backstory from you, your patient history. It's only by combining all those pieces that they can reach the final conclusion, a real diagnosis.
And this quote from the source material just sums it all up perfectly. You can't diagnose just from a picture. Sometimes two completely different problems can look almost identical on an X-ray. It really takes a professional's expertise to put all the pieces together and figure out what's truly going on.
Look, the goal today was never to turn you into a dentist. It's about making you a more confident, informed patient. Think of your X-ray as a map. And now that you understand the basic language of light and dark, you have the tools to follow along, ask smarter questions, and be a real partner in your own healthcare journey. So, the next time you're sitting in that chair and your dentist puts that image up on the screen, you're not going to just see a confusing jumble of black and white. You're going to see a story. And now you have a much better idea of how to read it. What new details will you be able to spot? You know the drill. You're sitting in the dentist's chair, they put that heavy apron on your lap, and you have to bite down on that awkward piece of plastic. But have you ever stopped to think about what's actually happening in that split second? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on the incredible journey of a dental X-ray, all the way from a single photon to a final diagnosis. It's this wild trip that starts with a tiny, invisible photon, travels right through you, and ends up as this critical piece of information that can literally save your teeth. And our story doesn't start in the dentist office. It starts over a century ago. And this quote, man, it just perfectly captures the spirit of discovery. So back in 1895, a scientist named Wilhelm Röntgen notices this mysterious glow coming from a screen in his lab. He had no clue what these powerful invisible rays were, so he just called them X-rays, X for unknown. Little did he know, his investigation of that unknown would change medicine forever. And you know what? The dental world moved fast. We're talking just weeks after Röntgen's discovery, a German dentist, Dr. Otto Walkhoff, took the first dental X-ray on himself. And get this, the exposure time was a staggering 25 minutes. Can you imagine? These early pioneers risked their own health to push this technology forward, which eventually led to the much, much safer X-ray tube we know today, developed back in 1913.
Okay, so how does that machine on the wall actually create an invisible beam of energy? Well, it all happens inside this part called the tube head. Let's trace the birth of a single X-ray photon, step by step.
Think of it like a four-step dance of physics. First, a current heats up a tiny filament, kind of like in an old light bulb, until it's so hot it starts boiling off a cloud of electrons. That's called thermionic emission. Then, a super high-voltage circuit acts like an electromagnetic cannon, launching these electrons at nearly the speed of light towards a small metal target. And when they slam into that target, bam! That violent collision converts all their speed and energy into a powerful burst of X-ray photons. Now, this is where it gets absolutely wild. For all that amazing physics, the whole process is incredibly inefficient. Just look at this. A staggering 99% of the energy from that collision is just wasted as pure heat. Only a tiny single percent actually becomes the useful X-ray beam we need. It's just a crazy reminder of how much power is being harnessed just to create that 1%. And these are the key players that make it all work. It's really a story of opposites attracting. On the negative side, the cathode. You've got the tungsten filament creating the electrons and a special focusing cup to aim them like a lens. They're all fired across to the positive side, the anode, where they smash into the tungsten target. And that simple-looking copper stem, it has one of the most critical jobs of all. It acts like a giant heat sink, pulling away that massive 99% of heat, so the whole machine doesn't just melt down. But here's the thing. Creating that powerful beam is only half the battle. Capturing an image that's actually useful for diagnosis, that's a true art form. It relies completely on the skill of the person taking the X-ray. Let's see why. The best way to think about a radiograph is to picture it as a super sophisticated shadow map. The X-ray beam is the light source, your teeth and bones are the objects casting the shadow, and the little sensor in your mouth is the wall where the shadow is recorded. And by studying those precise shadows, dentists can see everything that's hiding beneath the surface. But getting that shadow map just right is tricky. The angle of that X-ray machine is absolutely critical. If the angle is too steep, you get what's called foreshortening. The tooth looks comically short. If the angle is too flat, you get elongation, and it looks all stretched out. This shows you exactly why technique matters so much. A distorted image like this could easily hide a tiny fracture or an infection, making the whole X-ray useless. So, once a perfect shadow map is captured, the next step is to decode it. This is where a dentist translates all those black, white, and gray shapes into real, crucial information about your health. To read this map, you really only need to know 2 key words. Anything that shows up dark is called radiolucent. That just means X-rays passed right through it easily. Think soft tissue, nerves, or, and this is the important one, areas of decay. On the flip side, anything that looks white or light gray is radioopaque. That means it's dense and it blocked or absorbed the X-rays, like your healthy tooth enamel, fillings, and bone. This table is basically the perfect cheat sheet. Healthy, dense stuff like enamel and bone, that's going to be bright white or radiopaque. The soft tissues inside your tooth, radiolucent or dark. But here's the key. Look at pathology. Things like decay and abscesses show up as these dark, radiolucent spots. Why? Because the disease has literally eaten away the dense, healthy tissue that used to be there.
And here is a textbook example. A dental abscess, which is basically an infection at the very tip of a tooth's root, destroys the bone around it. So in an X-ray, it shows up as this distinct dark circle, a radiolucent spot, right where there should be solid, healthy white bone. It's a dead giveaway that lets dentists find these hidden problems deep inside your jaw.
You know, this brings up a really important point. While a trained hygienist or assistant can interpret an image, they can describe what they see, like, hey, there's a dark spot at the tip of this tooth. Only the dentist can legally make a diagnosis. They're the one who can officially say, this is a periapical abscess. It's a critical legal and professional distinction. All right, of course, we can't talk about X-rays without addressing the elephant in the room for a lot of people, radiation. So let's actually look at the real risk versus the incredible reward. So let's put this all in perspective, okay? The amount of radiation you get from a full set of modern digital dental X-rays is roughly the same as you'd get from a short 1 or 2 hour airplane flight. It's also just a tiny fraction of the natural background radiation we all get just from living on planet Earth for a year. Besides, every dental office follows a strict principle called ALARA. It stands for as low as reasonably achievable. They use special filters to block the weak, unnecessary X-rays, a lead collimator to narrow the beam so it only hits the target, and super sensitive digital sensors that need way less radiation than old-school film. Every single one of these things, right down to that lead apron, is designed to keep your exposure as low as humanly possible. So when it all comes down to it, it's pretty clear. The ability to find a serious problem, like an infection or a cyst or even a tumor, long before you ever feel it, well, that benefit is just monumental. And it's weighed against a very minimal, highly controlled risk.
So that really brings us to the final question, doesn't it? When you weigh the incredible power of seeing things that are completely hidden from the naked eye against the tiny, controlled risks we've just talked about, what's the verdict? For me, the answer is pretty clear. From Roentgen's mysterious glowing screen all the way back in 1895 to the instant digital images we get today, the dental X-ray is still one of the most powerful tools we have in our arsenal. It's a simple, quick procedure that truly lets us see the invisible, and lets us stop small problems before they ever have a chance to become big ones.
You've probably been there. You're sitting in the dentist's chair, they put that heavy apron on you, stick a little plastic thing in your mouth, and this big machine swings around your head. And a second later, there it is, this ghostly image of your teeth on a screen. But what are you actually looking at? Well, today, we're going to break it all down and decode the dental X-ray.
I mean, let's be honest. When you first see a panoramic X-ray like this one, it can look pretty wild, right? Maybe even a little bit intimidating. You've got all these weird shapes and shadows, bright white spots. It's a lot to take in.
But here's the thing. This isn't just a jumble of random shapes. It's actually a super detailed map of your mouth, your jaw, even your sinuses. And by the time we're done here, you're going to know how to read that map. You'll be able to understand the story your own X-rays are telling.
Okay, so first things first. We have to learn the basic language of X-rays. And trust me, it's way simpler than you might think.
The easiest way to think about an X-ray is that it's just a picture made of shadows. Really dense stuff in your body, like your bones or a metal filling, they block the X-ray beams, so they show up as white spots. But the less dense things, like your gums or just the air in your sinuses, the beams go right through them, and that creates the dark areas on the image.
Now, in the dental world, there are two key terms for this. Anything that shows up white is called radiopaque. It's opaque to the radiation. And anything that looks dark is called radiolucent, because the radiation, passes through it. If you can just remember those two words, you're honestly already halfway to reading one of these things.
And check this out. This is the perfect example. See on the left how those fillings are just glowing bright white? That's because metal is super dense, which makes it very, very radio-opaque. Now look at the image on the right. That huge dark space above the teeth, that's your nasal cavity. It's just full of air, which isn't dense at all, so it shows up as this big, dark, radiolucent area. It's really that simple.
All right, so now that we've got the lingo down, let's take a quick tour. We're going to identify some of the major landmarks you'll see on a panoramic X-ray. This is all about just getting our bearings.
And here is where it all starts to click. So on the left, you've got a classic textbook diagram of your sinuses. And on the right, the real deal, the X-ray. See those big dark patches on either side of the nose? Yep, those are your maxillary sinuses. They're just air-filled pockets, so they look radiolucent.
Okay, now find that dark nasal cavity again and look at what's separating it from your mouth. See that thick white line running right above the roots of your top teeth? That's your hard palate. It's literally the roof of your mouth. It's a dense slab of bone, so of course, it shows up as a bright radiopaque line.
And you absolutely cannot miss the biggest player in the bottom half of this picture, the mandible. That's your lower jaw. This big U-shaped bone is the foundation for all of your bottom teeth. And as you can see, it's a really solid, very radiopaque structure.
All right, so we've got the natural landscape down. Now for the really easy part. Spotting the stuff that dentists have put in there. Honestly, this is often the most obvious stuff on an X-ray.
So different dental materials have different densities, and that means they show up as different shades of white or gray. Old school metal fillings, they are the brightest white you'll see. Modern stuff like porcelain or zirconia crowns are also white, but a little less intense. And some temporary materials are so low density they can actually look kind of dark or radiolucent.
Here's a textbook example. You see those shapes that are way, way whiter than the teeth they're on? Those are classic metal-based fillings and crowns. They just soak up almost all the X-rays, making them totally impossible to miss.
Now, what about something a little more complex? If you ever see a bright white line going down into the root of a tooth, that's probably a post and core. So after a root canal, a tooth can be kind of hollow and weak. A dentist will put a metal or fiber post down in there to give it some strength before they put the crown on top.
And finally, these things are just unmistakable. If you see what looks like a screw drilled right into the jawbone, well, that's exactly what it is. It's a dental implant. They're usually made of titanium, so they're incredibly dense and show up as these perfectly defined bright white shapes. They're basically artificial roots for brand new teeth. Okay, so here's the most important point. Dentists aren't just taking these pictures to see what's already been fixed. The #1 job of an X-ray is to find what's going wrong, all the hidden problems that you just can't see in the mirror.
For the most part, dentists are hunting for two main culprits. First, cavities. When a tooth starts to decay, it loses minerals, it gets less dense, so a cavity shows up as a dark, radiolucent spot. And second, periodontal disease or gum disease. This nasty stuff attacks your jawbone and causes it to shrink away. So on an X-ray, you'll see that the white radio-opaque bone level is way lower than it's supposed to be.
And wow, this comparison says it all, doesn't it? On the left, that's a healthy mouth. See how the bone comes up nice and high on the necks of the teeth? Now look to the right. See how that bone level has just dropped, exposing way more of the tooth roots? That is crystal clear evidence of bone loss from periodontal disease.
Okay, before we wrap up, let's talk about what happens when the X-ray itself doesn't go perfectly. Getting a great image takes really good technique from the dental team and a little cooperation from you.
So, have you ever seen one of these big panoramic X-rays where the teeth look like they're in some kind of crazy, exaggerated smile? Or maybe a really sad frown? Well, that's not actually how the person's jaw is shaped. It's a classic sign that something went wrong with the positioning.
It really all comes down to your chin position. If your chin is tipped too far down when that machine swings around, it creates this sharp, almost Joker-like smile on the image. But if your chin is too high, it flattens everything out or even turns it into a frown. A tiny little tilt makes a huge difference.
And this is exactly why they're so insistent that you take out all your jewelry and piercings. This X-ray shows a ghost image from a nose ring. The machine scanned the real piercing, and then it created this blurry, mirrored artifact of it on the other side of the film. These ghosts can cover up really important details and make the X-ray a lot harder to read.
So, when you put it all together, a dental X-ray is so much more than just a picture. It's a history book, telling the story of all your past dental work. It's a diagnostic snapshot of your present health, and it's kind of like a crystal ball, helping your dentist see into the future to stop problems before they even start.
It's a whole story, told in nothing but shades of black, white, and gray. And now, the next time you're in that chair and you see your own X-ray pop up on the screen, you'll actually have the tools to start reading it for yourself. So, the only question left is, what's your story going to reveal?
All right, today we're diving into a piece of tech that is completely changing the game for dental X-rays. We're talking about taking this whole process out of the dark room and putting it, quite literally, into the palm of your hand. This is the Nomad Pro 2, and trust me, it's a big deal.
So let's just think back for a second. Picture yourself at your last dental checkup. You know the routine, right? They drape that heavy lead apron over you, you're sitting kind of awkwardly in the chair, and you just wait while the technician gets everything ready for the X-ray.
And for pretty much all of us, that experience involves a huge wall-mounted machine. You know that big, clunky arm that swings over and has to be positioned just perfectly? It's a process that honestly feels like it hasn't really changed in decades.
But what if it looked like this instead? I mean, look at the difference. On the left, you've got the old way. And on the right, that's the Nomad Pro 2. This is way more than just a smaller machine. It's about completely untethering the X-ray process from the wall and putting all that power right into the operator's hands.
And look, this is not just some minor upgrade. The leap here is like going from one of those giant, clunky desktop PCs of the 90s to the smartphone that's in your pocket right now. It fundamentally changes everything: the workflow, the accessibility, and especially the patient experience.
So, what's the secret sauce here? Well, first, it's true portability. The X-ray now comes to the patient, not the other way around. It's powered by a battery-operated DC generator, which gives you a much more consistent, efficient power source than those old wall units. Plus, it's universally compatible. Film, digital, you name it, it works. And maybe most importantly, you get these incredibly high-quality images while actually using less radiation than older systems. It's a win-win.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. How does a device this small pack so much punch? And, how easy is it to actually use?
Well, powering the device couldn't be simpler. It uses these swappable battery handsets. You literally just slide one onto the charging cradle. A full charge takes less than 3 hours, and since the system comes with 2 batteries, you can always have one charging while you're using the other. There's basically zero downtime. The whole thing is designed to just work.
Now you might be thinking, okay, smaller device, does that mean you sacrifice image quality? Absolutely not. In fact, it's the opposite. It uses a tiny 0.4mm focal spot. Think of it like the super sharp focus on a high-end camera lens for crystal clear, high-res images. The efficient DC power means shorter exposure times for the patient. And that backscatter shield we're going to talk more about, it actually helps improve image contrast. On top of all that, the two-handed grip makes it super stable, so you don't get any motion blur.
Okay, we have to address the elephant in the room. You're holding a device that emits radiation. I mean, come on, how can that possibly be safe for the person holding it? This is without a doubt the first question everyone asks, and for very good reason.
And you know what? The entire design of the Nomad is built from the ground up to answer that question with a very confident yes.
The real key to its safety is this integrated lead-infused acrylic shield. See, when an X-ray is taken, some radiation bounces or scatters back from the patient. It's just physics. This shield is perfectly positioned to block all of that backscatter radiation, protecting the person holding the device.
So this shield creates what's called a zone of safety. It's like a cone-shaped area right behind the device. As long as the operator stays within that zone, they are protected. It's really that simple. And because the shield is transparent, they can see exactly what they're doing, all while staying completely safe.
And the numbers? Well, the numbers here tell an absolutely incredible story. So if an operator takes about 7,200 X-rays a year, their average exposure is just 0.12 millisieverts. Now, to put that in perspective, airline flight crews get almost 2.2 millisieverts every year just from cosmic radiation flying at high altitudes. And both of those are just a tiny, tiny fraction of the U.S. occupational safety limit of 50 millisieverts. The data is crystal clear. The exposure is incredibly low.
And hey, if you need even more proof of just how committed the manufacturer is to safety, get this. The FDA has a standard for how much radiation is allowed to leak from a device. Well, the makers of Nomad hold themselves to an internal standard that is 44 times more stringent than what the government legally requires. 44 times!
So we've established it's safe, and we know it produces amazing, high-quality images. But how does that actually translate to precision in a real clinic? How does it help dentists get the best possible results for their patients?
To get the most accurate images possible, dentists use what's called the paralleling technique. It's all about simple geometry, really. The little sensor in your mouth is placed parallel to your tooth, and the X-ray beam is aimed at a perfect 90-degree right angle to both of them. Now, this technique is the absolute gold standard. Why? Because it creates these super accurate, distortion-free images that can be perfectly replicated years later to compare changes over time. And this is where the Nomad just shines. Trying to get that perfect 90-degree angle with a big, clumsy, wall-mounted arm can be surprisingly tricky. But with a lightweight, handheld device, the operator can just effortlessly line up the perfect shot every single time.
This quote from Dr. Ann Birnbaum just puts the device's real-world value into perspective. She used it in the incredibly demanding conditions of victim identification after Hurricane Katrina, and it performed flawlessly and safely. It just proves its reliability not only in a nice, clean clinic, but out in the most challenging environments you can possibly imagine.
So when you combine this level of portability with this image quality and this proven safety, it becomes pretty clear this isn't just an improvement on an old idea. We're really looking at a whole new era for diagnostics.
So what's the bottom line here? What does this all mean? It means X-ray imaging is finally officially untethered from the wall. It means we can have this incredible portability without compromising safety. In fact, you could argue it enhances it. And ultimately, it means that the highest standard of dental care can be delivered absolutely anywhere, whether it's a high-tech clinic in the city, a remote village, or even a disaster relief site.
And that really leaves us with a fascinating question to ponder, doesn't it? The Nomad Pro 2 proved that a critical diagnostic tool could be unshackled from the wall and made completely mobile. So it really makes you wonder, what other essential medical technology is just sitting there, waiting for its own handheld revolution?
Hey everyone, welcome back. You know the drill, right? You're at the dentist, they slide that little plastic thing in your mouth, you hear a beep, and boom, a picture of your teeth pops up on the screen. And most of us, we just assume they're on a hunt for cavities. But today, we're gonna peel back the curtain and see what those black and white shadows are really telling us. It's a whole hidden world in there.
So that's the big question. What is your dentist actually looking for? You gotta think of them as a detective, and that X-ray, that's their #1 clue. They're piecing together a story, the story of an old injury you forgot about, or the body's super quiet response to a problem, or just the subtle changes that happen deep inside a tooth over your entire life. All right, let's start our journey on the outside and look at how things like external forces, what dentists just call trauma, can really impact not just your teeth, but the bone that holds them in place. So when we talk about trauma in dentistry, we mean any kind of injury from an outside force. A fall, taking a basketball to the face, any kind of impact. And yeah, you might see a chip on the surface with your own eyes, but the X-ray is absolutely crucial because it tells the rest of the story. It shows that hidden damage to the roots and the jawbone that you would just never ever see otherwise.
It's pretty cool how different kinds of fractures show up.
Crown fractures, the ones you can often see, usually happen right on those front teeth. But root fractures, oh, those are way trickier. The X-ray beam has to hit the fracture line at the perfect angle just to spot it. And then for the really big impacts, you might get a jaw fracture, which almost always happens in the lower jaw. On a big panoramic X-ray, it shows up as this clear dark line.
Now, sometimes a tooth isn't actually broken, but it's been knocked out of place. The fancy term for this is luxation, and it's all about displacement. And as you'll see, a tooth can get displaced in a few very different ways.
So this slide really breaks it down nicely. There are 3 main ways a tooth can go. Intrusion is when it gets shoved deeper into the bone. Extrusion is the opposite. It's partially pushed out of the bone. And then there's avulsion, which is the most dramatic one. That's when the tooth is knocked completely, totally out of its socket.
Okay, so that covers all the damage that can happen from the outside. But what about the changes that start from within? Now we're going to go deeper, right inside the tooth itself, to see how it reacts to things like injury, inflammation, or even just the process of aging.
Now this is where things get really weird and interesting. It's a process called resorption, where the tooth's own structure just starts to dissolve. And it can happen from 2 directions. You've got external resorption, which starts on the outside of the root. It can make the root tip look kind of blunted or shorter. Then you have internal resorption, which starts from the inside and basically hollows out the tooth. It's almost like the tooth is being eaten away, either from the outside in or the inside out.
So here's another thing that happens on the inside. It's called pulpal sclerosis. The best way to think about it is that the pulp chamber, the living center of the tooth, it just slowly starts to shrink. It's like the tooth is building a thicker wall on the inside as we get older. It's not really a problem, but it's a super clear sign of aging that you can see right on the X-ray. And then you've got the more extreme version of that, with pulpal obliteration. That pulp chamber makes so much extra dentin that it literally looks like it's been filled in completely. You look at the X-ray and the canal where the nerve used to be, it just looks like it vanished.
And finally, in this little section, we have pulp stones. They are pretty much exactly what they sound like, tiny, round calcifications that form inside the pulp. On an X-ray, they look just like little pebbles. They don't really cause any problems or need treatment, but they're just another part of that tooth's hidden story.
Okay, for the deepest part of our journey, we're traveling all the way down to the very tip of the root, the apex. This is like command central for the body's response when a deep infection makes its way through the tooth and out into the jawbone.
So down at the root tip, dentists are basically looking for 2 kinds of clues: dark spots and light spots. A dark spot, or what they call radiolucent, means bone has been lost, usually because of an infection. A light spot, or radiopaque, means dense bone has been added. They're basically opposite reactions to the same problem.
Right, let's talk about those dark spots. You could be looking at a granuloma, which is just a mass of inflamed tissue. Or it could be a cyst, which is something that develops over a much longer time. Or it could be an abscess, that classic pocket of pus. The tricky part is they can all look like a similar dark circle on an X-ray, but they represent totally different stages of an infection. Figuring out which one it is, that's a huge part of the puzzle.
Okay, so we've covered the dark spots. What about the light spots? Well, the single most common one is a condition called condensing osteitis. This is actually the body playing defense. Instead of the bone dissolving away from an infection, the body responds to this chronic, low-grade irritation by building a wall, a fortress of dense, compact bone to try and contain the problem. It's a sign that your body is actively trying to protect itself.
So, after this whole journey, right, from the crown all the way down to the root, after seeing how teeth can break and move and literally change from the inside out, what's the one crucial thing to remember from all of this? This right here is the whole point. An X-ray is an incredibly important clue, but it's only one piece of the diagnostic puzzle. That dark spot at the end of the root, it could be a granuloma, a cyst, or an abscess. To know for sure, a dentist has to combine what they see on the X-ray with a real clinical exam and your personal history. The shadow is a critical clue, but it's not the final answer. And that really brings us to a much bigger idea, doesn't it? A simple dental X-ray can reveal this entire hidden world of trauma and defense and the changes of a lifetime. It just makes you wonder. What other amazing, complex stories are hiding just beneath the surface of all the things we think we know?
All right, today we're going to tackle one of the most common, but let's be honest, kind of mysterious images in all of medicine, the dental X-ray.
We're going to turn that confusing map of black, white, and gray into a story you can actually read. You'll finally see what your dentist sees.
You know that moment, you're in the chair, and you find yourself just nodding along as your dentist points at what honestly looks like a piece of modern art? Yeah, you are definitely not alone. But hey, stick with me, because by the end of this, you'll be spotting fillings, crowns, and even the first signs of gum disease all on your own.
Okay, so first things first. We've got to learn the basic language here. It's kind of like learning your ABCs before you can read a book. And in the world of X-rays, that alphabet is all about two things: light and dark.
So, here's the #1 rule, the most important thing to get. The brighter something looks on that X-ray, the denser it is. Think about it. Stuff that's radio opaque, that's the fancy word, like a metal filling or the super hard enamel on your teeth, it's so dense it literally blocks the X-rays. That's why it leaves a bright white spot. Now the flip side is stuff that's less dense, like the nerve deep inside your tooth. We call that radiolucent. The X-rays just pass right on through and that creates a darker area. So let's just boil it down. Bright means dense. Dark means, well, not so dense. Simple as that.
All right, so now that we've got the language of light and dark down, let's start identifying the landmarks on our map. We're going to use our new lingo to spot all the different kinds of dental work you might have hiding in there.
Let's kick things off with a classic, the amalgam filling. You probably know it as a silver filling. Now, since it's metal, it is super dense. That means on an X-ray, it just screams, "Look at me." It shows up as this brilliant, solid white shape. And here's a key giveaway. Look for those irregular borders. It almost looks like someone packed it into the tooth, which is pretty much what happened.
Okay, now for a total contrast. Modern composite fillings. You know, the tooth-colored ones. And this is where it gets interesting, because their appearance can be all over the place. They can look anything from dark to kind of a grayish white. Some of the older ones might even look dark, radiolucent, just because of the materials they used back then. The newer ones, yeah, they're a bit brighter, but they will never be as blindingly white as a metal filling. They'll always look a lot duller.
Crowns? Oh yeah, they've got their own unique fingerprint on an X-ray. So a PFM, that's porcelain fused to metal, you'll see two layers, a super bright metal core with a slightly less bright porcelain layer kind of draped over it. Then you've got your all-porcelain crowns, which honestly look a lot like a real tooth. Gold? You can't miss it. It's totally bright white, just like amalgam, but the giveaway is its super smooth, perfectly regular borders. And finally, stainless steel. You see these a lot on kids' teeth. It's bright for sure, but sometimes it has this kinda see-through quality to it.
Okay, we've mapped out the man-made stuff. Now let's put on our detective hats and look for clues of something a little more serious: periodontal disease. That's gum disease. And the key to this whole investigation? It's the bone that's holding your teeth in place.
So this is what we're looking for as our healthy starting point. In a healthy mouth, the bone level, the alveolar crest, should be this nice, sharp, crisp line. And it should sit just a tiny bit, like 1 to 2 millimeters, below where the enamel of the tooth meets the root. That spot is called the CEJ. But what really matters is that this line is our critical benchmark. Everything is compared to this.
Now, when gum disease kicks in, that nice bone line starts to, well, it starts to disappear. And dentists have a way of classifying how bad it is. In the early stages, like stage 1 and stage 2, the bone loss is still pretty close to the top of the root. But by the time you hit stage 3, that bone is receded all the way to the middle third of the root. And stage 4, it's gone even further. You can really see how it goes from a minor issue to a very serious problem.
And get this, even the pattern of the bone loss tells a story. So you've got horizontal bone loss. Think of it like a shoreline receding evenly across the whole beach. The bone is just lost in a flat plane. But then there's a vertical bone loss, which is more like a sinkhole opening up right next to one tooth. It creates this uneven, angular dip. Just seeing which type it is tells the dentist a ton about how the disease is actually progressing. Okay, deep breath. We've learned the language of light and dark, we've identified fillings and crowns, and we've looked for the sneaky signs of disease. Now it's time for the big aha moment. Let's put all these new skills together and see if we can read a more complicated story on an X-ray.
Let's do a quick walkthrough. Look at that bright white kind of jagged shape. Bam, classic amalgam filling. Now see that bright white line running down the middle of the root? That's gutta percha. It means that tooth had a root canal. Okay, now look over at the bone level here. See how it's dropped down? That's our horizontal bone loss. And what about that dark spot creeping into the tooth? Yep, that's a cavity. And that little rough, spiky thing on the side of the root? That's calculus,
hardened tartar. See? You're already doing it. You're reading the story.
All right, before we wrap this up, let's get to the really fun stuff, the surprises. Because sometimes an X-ray captures a whole lot more than just your teeth and bones.
Have you ever looked at an X-ray and seen this weird, blurry shape that just does not seem to belong? It might be a ghost image. It's so cool. This happens when a really dense metal object, like an earring, is on one side of your head. The X-ray beam hits it and creates this faint kind of magnified and blurry ghost of that earring on the other side of the image. Spooky, right?
Okay, this one is fascinating. An amalgam tattoo. And no, it's not ink. This is what happens when a tiny little piece of a silver filling accidentally gets stuck in your gums or your cheek, maybe when an old filling was being removed, and on the X-ray, it just shows up as this little random bright spot out in the soft tissue where it's not supposed to be.
And believe me, it doesn't stop there. All sorts of things can photobomb your dental X-ray. We're talking nose jewelry, the metal frames of your glasses, even that little metal chain on the bib they put on you. They all show up as these unexpected bright white shapes, and sometimes they end up blocking the exact thing your dentist is trying to look at.
So, there you have it. You are no longer just sitting there passively nodding along. You now have the basic tools to be an active part of the conversation about your own health. So the next time your dentist puts up that image, you're going to be able to see the story it's telling. The real question is, what will you discover?
Hey there. Ever glanced over your dentist's shoulder at an X-ray and thought, what am I even looking at? It just seems like a bunch of gray smudges, right? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on all that. We are going to learn the secret language that dental pros use to talk about exactly what they see, turning that confusing image into a story that actually makes sense.
Okay, let's just dive right in. I mean, look at this X-ray. For most of us, it's just a jumble of light shapes and dark shapes. It's a total mystery. But for a dental professional, this is like a detailed map full of clues. So what on earth are they actually seeing here?
And that right there is the absolute key. See, it's not about jumping straight to a diagnosis. It's about being able to describe it using a very specific, shared vocabulary. That precision, that ability to describe, is the first and honestly the most important step to understanding what an X-ray is trying to tell us.
So let's get one thing straight right off the bat. This isn't about learning how to diagnose problems. Nope, this is about learning the language of description. This is the universal terminology that lets a hygienist in one office communicate perfectly with a dentist in another just by describing what an image looks like.
You know, think of it like a crime scene investigation. The dental hygienist is the boots-on-the-ground detective, the first one there, carefully describing every single detail of the scene. Then the dentist is like the chief inspector. They take that detailed report, combine it with other evidence, like your health history, and then they're the one to solve the case by making the final diagnosis. We're here to learn the detective work.
Okay, so where do we even begin with all this? Well, every good investigation starts with the basics. For us, it all boils down to the most fundamental question you can ask about any little part of an X-ray. Is it light or is it dark? That simple observation is our way in. It's the first step to cracking the code.
And here they are, probably the two most important words you're going to learn today. Radiolucent. That describes the dark or black areas. This happens where X-rays can pass right through something soft, like your tooth pulp or maybe an area of decay. And radioopaque. Well, that refers to the light or white areas. That's where really dense things like bone, enamel, or fillings literally block the X-rays from passing through.
And boom, this X-ray shows both of them perfectly. See those dark patches on the teeth? That's radiolucent. But then look at those super bright, almost glowing white areas? Those are radioopaque fillings. They're so dense they block pretty much everything. So simple, right? Dark is lucent, white is opaque. Got it? All right, now that we have our basic terms down, let's grab our magnifying glass and zoom in on those dark spots. We're going to get into the specific language used to describe the shape, the borders, and the structure of these radiolucent areas, or lesions as they're called. So the first thing you ask is, how many little rooms or compartments does this thing have? If it's just one single self-contained dark spot, we call it a unilocular lesion. Just think uni like unicycle for one. It's just a simple single chamber. Now, let's zoom in even closer, right to the edge. A unilocular lesion can have what's called a corticated border, and that just means it has this thin, clean, radiopaque, remember white, line around the outside. This little white halo usually tells us that it's something that's been growing slowly, and the body's had enough time to build a little wall around it.
Okay, so that was the diagram. And here it is in the wild on a real X-ray. You can totally see that single dark area, right? Now look really closely at the edge and, yep, there it is. That fine white corticated rim. It's exactly what we just saw in the drawing.
But what if it's not just one single compartment? What if a lesion has a bunch of different chambers or lobes that all look like they've kind of fused together? Well, we call that multilocular. And the classic way to describe it is that it looks like soap bubbles. This appearance can sometimes hint at something that's growing a bit more aggressively.
And hey, look at that. We're back to our mystery X-ray from the very beginning. But now you can see it with new eyes, can't you? It's not just some random dark blob anymore. You can clearly see the different chambers, the compartments. This is a perfect example of a multilocular radiolucent lesion.
Okay, after you've described what it looks like, you have to say where it is. Location, 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 right? We use these really precise terms to pinpoint it. Is it periapical, which is around the very tip of the tooth's root? Is it interradicular, meaning between the roots? Is it in an edentulous zone, an area where a tooth is missing? Or is it pericoronal, which means it's wrapped around the crown of a tooth that hasn't fully emerged yet?
All right, detective, we have thoroughly investigated the dark spots. Now it's time to flip the script and turn our attention to the radiopaque, the light spots. And just like their dark counterparts, these have their own unique set of descriptions that help tell the story. First up, the most straightforward one, a focal opacity. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a single, focused, well-defined spot of white stuff. Simple as that. Bam. Done. Okay, now we get a little fancier. This is a target lesion. And why is it called that? Because it looks just like a target. You've got that white center, the bullseye, and it's surrounded by a thin, dark, radiolucent halo. And last but not least for these, let's talk texture. This one isn't a solid white blob. It's more hazy, granular, almost pebbly. We call this a ground glass opacity. And a great way to think about it is that the texture looks kind of like the peel of an orange. It's a key clue about the internal pattern of the bone.
Okay. Deep breath, we've collected all our clues. We know about light versus dark, single versus multiple compartments, borders, locations, textures. Now it's time to put it all together. It's time to build our case file and create a full professional description.
So you always start with the structure. How many parts does it have? What's the border like? So our professional description begins with a unilocular, corticated.
Okay, what's next? The most basic clue of all. Is it light or is it dark? Well, this one's dark. So we add the next piece of our puzzle, radiolucent lesion.
And finally, for the grand finale, we pinpoint exactly where it is on the map. We finish our sentence with, in a pericoronal location.
And there you have it. Let's put it all together and look at the image, a unilocular, corticated, radiolucent lesion in a pericoronal location. See how that works? Every single one of those words paints a very specific picture. What was once just a confusing gray smudge is now a clearly described finding. That is the power of this secret language.
So, you've done it. You've cracked the basic code. You've learned how to see, not just look. The next time you catch a glimpse of a dental X-ray, you're not going to see random shapes anymore. You're going to see clues, patterns, a story that's just waiting to be described. The only question left is, what stories are hidden in your X-rays?
You know those shadowy dental X-rays? It's so easy to see them as this really complex, maybe even a little scary medical image. But today, we're going to flip that idea on its head. We're going to look at this thing not as some confusing puzzle, but as a detailed and, believe it or not, totally readable map of your own jaw. So let's unfold this map and get started.
So this is what we're talking about, a panoramic radiograph. It's an amazing piece of tech that gives your dentist one single, flat image of your entire jaw, which is, of course, a three-dimensional thing. And just like any good map, it's packed with landmarks and all sorts of points of interest just waiting for us to explore.
I get it. At first glance, it might just seem like a messy jumble of black, white, and gray shapes. But I promise, by the end of this, you'll see it for what it really is, a super detailed map. Our whole goal here is to give you the legend, the key, so you can start to navigate it all on your own. Okay, so to read this map, we really only need to know 2 words. That's the whole legend. First up, radiopaque. This is all the dense stuff. We're talking bone, tooth enamel, fillings. They block the X-rays so they show up as bright white. The opposite of that is radiolucent. These are the less dense spots, like air or nerve channels that X-rays just pass right through, and those look dark or black. So, white is dense, black is not. Simple as that.
And this right here shows it perfectly. On the left, you've got a physical skull. You can see how solid that bone is. And on the right, you see how that exact same dense bone shows up as those bright, white, radiopaque areas on the X-ray. It's a direct translation. So now that we have our legend, our tour can officially begin.
All right, our first stop is going to be the hinge of this whole operation, the jaw joint. You might have heard of it as the TMJ or the temporal mandibular joint. This is where your lower jaw actually connects to your skull.
And the first landmark we're looking for here is called the mandibular condyle. Just think of it like the ball in a classic ball-and-socket joint. It's that rounded top of your lower jaw that does all the heavy lifting when you talk, chew, or yawn. It's also a really critical spot for dentists to check out to see if there's any wear and tear from grinding your teeth or any other issues with the jaw joint.
And there it is, right on our map. See it? The condyle is that rounded, white, remember radiopaque, knob at the very top left and top right of the whole jawbone structure. That's the hinge.
Well, of course, a ball needs a socket to fit into, and that socket has a name, the glenoid fossa. It's this little depression in the temporal bone of your skull, and it's basically the perfect shape to hold that condyle.
So if we look back at the map, you can see it so clearly. The fossa is this curved, white shape sitting right above the condyle we just found. You can literally see the ball fitting right into the socket, and together, that's what makes up that super important jaw joint.
Okay, tour's moving on. Let's go from the joint and travel into the territory of the upper jaw, which scientists call the maxilla.
Now, the maxilla is a major piece of your facial architecture. I mean, it holds all your upper teeth, it forms the floor of your nose, and it's got these surprisingly big empty air spaces inside it.
Speaking of those air spaces, the biggest ones are the maxillary sinuses. You've got two of them, one on each side, sitting right above your back teeth. And that's all they are, just empty, air-filled pockets inside your cheekbones.
Now, since they're just full of air, the sinuses are a perfect example of something that's radiolucent. So on our map, they show up as these big, dark areas right above the roots of your upper molars. That darkness is just empty space. And fun fact, their location is exactly why a bad sinus infection can sometimes feel just like a toothache.
Okay, next up is a landmark that every single one of us can feel right now. Just use your tongue. It's the hard palate. It's the bony roof of your mouth that separates your mouth from your nose.
Now this is a really cool example of how a 3D thing gets shown on a 2D map. Your curved palate gets kind of flattened by the X-ray machine into this single, dense, white line, radiopaque of course, that just runs straight across the picture right above the tips of your upper teeth.
All right, from the upper jaw, let's guide our tour down to the mandible, the powerhouse that is your lower jaw.
I absolutely love how the source material describes our next landmark. It's called the coronoid process, and it's described as, quote, a thin prominence of bone that is shaped like a crow's beak. How cool is that? It's a super important attachment point for one of your main chewing muscles.
And you can totally see that crow's beak right here on the image. It's that sharp, pointy, white triangle just in front of the round condyle we looked at earlier. Seriously, once you see the beak, you can't unsee it.
Now this next feature, this is basically the lifeline for all of your lower teeth. It's called the mandibular canal, and it's a little protected tube running right through the bone, carrying the main nerve and blood vessels for your whole lower jaw. Knowing exactly where this is absolutely critical for a dentist, especially if they're planning on taking out a wisdom tooth or putting in an implant. You do not want to damage that nerve.
And you can trace this vital highway right here on the map. See that dark, radiolucent band? That's the hollow part of the canal, and it's outlined by two thin parallel white lines, which is the dense bone of the canal walls. You can see it just snake its way all along the lower jaw. Pretty neat.
So for our final stop, we're actually going to move beyond the bone. A common mistake is to only look at the white parts of an X-ray, but the dark spaces and those faint shadows are just as important to the story.
Yeah, this map isn't just about the landmasses. The waterways are crucial too. Those dark radiolucent spots are air passages. For instance, this dark band here is the palatoglossal airspace. That's just a fancy name for the space between your tongue and the roof of your mouth. Its shape can actually tell the dentist if your tongue was in the right spot when they took the X-ray.
And it isn't just air. If you look really closely at the image, you can start to see these faint, kind of ghostly gray shadows.
Those are your soft tissues. They're denser than air, sure, but way less dense than bone. You might be able to spot the outline of your tongue, the soft palate, your lips, and sometimes you can even see your earlobes ghosting over the bone. And just like that, we've done it. We started with what looked like a confusing jumble of shadows, and now we have a readable, fascinating map. You can spot the hinge of your jaw, you can see the air in your sinuses, the roof of your mouth, and even the nerve that powers your teeth. It's all right there.
Look, this map is just packed with information about your own personal health and your history. So now that you have the legend, the next time you see your panoramic X-ray, you won't just see shadows, you'll see a story. So, what will you discover?
You know that moment in the dentist chair where you glance over at that black and white image of your teeth and it feels like you're trying to read some kind of alien language? Well, today we're going to crack that code. We are going to demystify what your dentist is actually seeing.
So here it is. This is the mystery we're setting out to solve. I know, it might just look like a jumble of shadows and bright spots, but believe me, every single part of this image tells a story about your dental health. The trick, of course, is just knowing how to read it. So think of this as a kind of detective journey. We're about to uncover all the secrets that are hiding in plain sight right there in your dental X-ray. Okay, first things first, we have to learn the basic language of the X-ray. It's a world of black, white, and gray. And every single one of those shades has a very specific meaning. Here are the two most important words you're going to need to know: radiolucent and radiopaque. Now think of it this way. Radiolucent areas are kind of like windows. They're less dense, so the X-ray beams pass right through them, and that makes them look dark or black on the film. Radiopaque structures, on the other hand, they're like walls. They're super dense, they block the X-rays, and so they show up as light or white. And this illustrates the difference perfectly. Over on the left, you see the nasal cavity. It's mostly just empty space, right? So it's dark, radiolucent. But then look to the right at those dental crowns. They are incredibly dense, so they resist the X-rays and show up as bright white, or radiopaque. So just remember this. Dark means less dense, and white means more dense. And with just that one little rule, you're already starting to speak the language of X-ray. All right, now that we have our decoder key, this is our map for the journey. Don't worry about all the little details on here. We're just going to use this to navigate the key landmarks of the upper and lower jaw. And we're going to start with the upper jaw, which is called the maxilla. Okay, let's kick off our tour in the upper jaw. The maxilla has some really fascinating features that show up crystal clear on an X-ray, once you know what you're looking for. First up, I want you to look right between the roots of the two front teeth. Do you see that small, dark, circular area? That's our very first landmark. It's actually an opening in the bone, and it's called the incisive foramen. So here's what you need to remember to spot it. It's a small, round, or oval-shaped radiolucent area, meaning it's dark. And its location is key. You will always find it right between the roots of those upper front teeth. Now let's move on to a much, much larger feature. This illustration here shows the maxillary sinus. This is a hollow space inside your cheekbones. And fun fact, it's actually the largest sinus in your entire skull. So now let's find it on the X-ray. See that big, dark, radiolucent area just above the roots of the upper teeth? That's it. That's the maxillary sinus. Because it's a cavity that's filled with air, it's not dense at all, which makes it a perfect example of a radiolucent structure. Okay, so we've seen the dark, the windows. Now let's switch from dark to light, from a window to a wall. We're going to shift our focus to a radio-opaque structure. This is the zygoma, which you probably just know as your cheekbone. And on an X-ray, this bone has a really distinctive look. It shows up as a J or U-shaped radiopacity, that bright white shape, right above the upper first molar area. It's a really key landmark that dentists are always looking for. All right, our tour is moving on down. We're heading to the lower jaw now. We're about to explore the mandible, which happens to be the largest and strongest bone in the entire face. Now check this out. Running right through this powerful bone is a super important passageway called the mandibular canal. You can see it here in this 3D view. It's basically a tunnel that protects the nerve that gives all the feeling to your lower teeth. Now, what's really cool is how this canal appears on an X-ray. It looks like a dark radiolucent band, that's the canal itself, but it's outlined by two thin, bright white radiopaque lines. Those little white lines, That's the super dense bone that forms the walls of the canal. So let's lock that in. To spot the mandibular canal, you're looking for that really unique pattern, a dark channel with bright white borders, and inside, it's carrying that all-important nerve through the lower jaw. Here's another key landmark on the mandible, the mental foramen. It's that small, round, dark opening near the roots of the lower premolars. And get this, here's an interesting little tidbit. Because it's a dark spot near the root of a tooth, this perfectly normal, healthy feature is actually misdiagnosed all the time as a dental abscess or some other kind of problem. And that risk of misdiagnosis brings up a really crucial point. Why does identifying all this stuff actually matter? Well, it's because these landmarks are the guideposts that dentists use to get a perfect, diagnostically useful image. For example, let's take a really common X-ray called a bite wing. The dentist has a very precise checklist. They need to see a specific part of a tooth and make sure the spaces between the teeth are wide open. Now, this isn't just about getting a pretty picture. Getting the alignment right based on all the anatomy we've just seen is the only way to spot tiny little cavities or bone loss that could otherwise be totally missed. Okay, so we've been deep in the weeds looking at all the tiny details. For our final step, let's kind of zoom out and think about what this all means in the bigger picture. Think about what we've really been doing this whole time. We've been translating this incredibly complex, three-dimensional structure, our own skull, into a flat, two-dimensional image. Every single canal and opening we've identified is just one small part of this intricate, amazing piece of natural engineering. And that really is the main takeaway. A dental X-ray isn't just a picture of your teeth. It's a window into a hidden world. It really makes you wonder, if a simple X-ray can reveal this much about the landscape of our jaws, what other amazing stories is our anatomy just waiting to tell us? All right, today we're going to piece together a pretty fascinating puzzle that takes place, well, right inside your own mouth. We're talking about the dental X-ray. We've all been through it, but what exactly does it take to get that perfect picture of your teeth? Let's dive in. You know the feeling, right? You're sitting in the chair, you've got that heavy apron on, and the hygienist is asking you to bite down on this uncomfortable piece of plastic at some bizarre angle. Well, it turns out all that awkwardness, it serves a really important purpose. They're trying to solve a surprisingly tricky problem. So here's the core challenge. Your jaw is a curve, but an X-ray film or sensor is flat. And if you try to capture a clear image of a curved object on a flat surface, you get what's called dimensional distortion. Basically, the teeth can look all stretched out or squished. It's a pretty big geometric hurdle to overcome. So how do dental professionals get around this? I mean, how do they solve this puzzle? Well, they don't just point and shoot. They use a very, very clever geometry trick that has been a cornerstone of dentistry for a long, long time. It's called the bisecting technique, and it's designed specifically to create an accurate image even when that little film can't lie perfectly flat against your teeth. The name itself is actually a huge clue as to how it works, and it's all based on one single powerful geometric rule. That principle is called the rule of isometry. And don't worry, there's not going to be a quiz. All it really means is that if you have two triangles that share one side and they have two equal angles, then those triangles are, for all intents and purposes, identical. This simple rule is the secret weapon against that distortion problem. Okay, so here's how they actually use it in your mouth. First, that film or receptor that you're biting on forms an angle with your tooth. Then, the technician imagines a line that cuts that angle perfectly in half. It bisects it. And here's the magic trick. They aim the X-ray machine perpendicular to that imaginary line, not at the tooth and not at the film. This creates two equal imaginary triangles, and because of the rule of isometry, the image that comes out shows the true length of the tooth. It's an absolutely genius solution. Now, as you can imagine, this whole thing takes some serious skill. Because if that vertical angle is even a little bit off, you get distortion. If they aim the beam too steeply, the tooth looks all squished and short. That's called foreshortening. But if they aim it too flat, the tooth looks stretched out, which is called elongation. Precision is everything. Okay, so we've used some pretty slick geometry to get the images. But getting the pictures is just step one. Now we have this collection of small individual shots. And believe it or not, the real puzzle is just getting started. Just think about it. How does a dental professional take this handful of little films and arrange them so they tell the complete, coherent story of your mouth without mixing up the right side from the left or the top from the bottom? This is where the next piece of the puzzle comes into play, film mounting. And mounting these films isn't just about being tidy. No, it's a critical safety step. I mean, sure, it protects the images and makes them easier to look at, but most importantly, it puts them in the correct anatomical order. This drastically reduces the risk of a dentist mixing up the left side of your mouth with the right when they're looking for problems. So what's their secret? How do they know what goes where? Well, they look for natural landmarks in your mouth, and one of the most important guides is something called the curve of Spee. It's that slight upward, kind of smile-like curve your bottom teeth make from the front to the back. This natural feature is a key landmark for getting all those x-rays oriented correctly. It really all comes down to this one simple idea. Mount like puzzle pieces. By using landmarks like that curve of Spee and looking at the unique shapes of each tooth, the hygienist pieces the individual films together, one by one, until a complete picture of your mouth finally emerges. Okay, the puzzle is assembled. We have this perfect full mouth series all mounted and ready to go. But now comes the most critical part, interpreting what it all means. This is where the real detective work begins. Because these x-rays, they reveal a whole world you just can't see with your own eyes. Professionals are trained to spot the tiniest, subtlest signs of cavities that are starting to form between your teeth. They check the bone levels to see how your gum health is doing, and they examine the roots for any signs of infection or other problems. They're also on the lookout for things like unerupted teeth or changes inside the nerve of the tooth. And you know, this whole process is a real team effort. Your dental hygienist is an expert at capturing and assembling these images, and they can do an initial assessment. But the final, official interpretation and diagnosis, the part where they tell you what it all means for your health, that is the responsibility of the dentist. So, when you step back and look at the whole picture, the clever geometry, the careful puzzle solving, the expert detective work, it kind of gives you a whole new appreciation for what seems like just a routine procedure, right? So the next time you're in that chair, biting down on that little sensor, you'll know what's really going on. It is so much more than just a snapshot. It's a precise application of geometry, a meticulous assembly process, and a detailed diagnostic map that is absolutely essential for your health. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question. Every single x-ray tells a story about your health, about your history, and about what might be coming next. So next time you see yours up on the screen, you'll know just how much skill went into revealing its secrets. Now the only question is, what stories are your x-rays telling? All right, have you ever thought of your dentist as a kind of detective? Because today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're diving into a 3D mystery that dentists have to solve all the time, using just a flat 2D clue, an x-ray. We're going to find out how they pinpoint exactly where something is hidden inside your jaw. Let's get into it. You know, every single day, dentists are faced with these little puzzles hidden right inside our mouths. So let's open up our first case file and see exactly what kind of challenge they're up against. So here's our first piece of evidence. It's an x-ray, and you can clearly see something that shouldn't be there, a little piece of a broken instrument. Now, the image tells us that it's there, but it doesn't tell us where it is in 3 dimensions. Is it closer to the cheek side, what dentists call the buccal side, or is it nearer to the tongue on the lingual side? Looking at this one flat picture, it's impossible to tell. It's a total mystery. And that right there is the heart of the problem with any x-ray. We're trying to understand a complex 3D structure by looking at its 2D shadow. All of that crucial information about depth just gets completely flattened out. So, this is our central question. How in the world do you solve a 3D puzzle when your main clue is totally flat? Well, it turns out these dental detectives have some very clever techniques up their sleeves. So what's the first step in any good investigation? You survey the entire scene, right? Before you zoom in on one little clue, you need to get the wide view. And for a dental detective, that means using a different kind of x-ray. This brings us to something called the occlusal technique. Just think of this as the detective's wide-angle lens. Instead of focusing on just a couple of teeth, this method is designed to capture a huge, sweeping view of the entire upper or lower jaw, all in one shot. And here is what that wide-angle view actually looks like. An occlusal x-ray gives you this kind of top-down map of the whole dental arch, and this perspective is incredibly useful for spotting the bigger picture. This broader perspective is just perfect for spotting all sorts of hidden clues, things like foreign objects, unerupted teeth, even fractures and salivary stones. It gives you the lay of the land, so to speak. But it still doesn't solve our original 3D problem. For that, we need a really clever trick. So, how do dentists add that missing third dimension back into the picture? Well, they use this brilliant principle that's wrapped up in a simple and honestly, a very memorable rule. Now, officially, this trick is known as the buccal object rule. At its core, it's a method that uses two X-rays, not just one, taken from slightly different angles, to finally figure out an object's true depth. And the easiest way to remember how this rule works is with a simple four-letter mnemonic, S-L-O-B, slob. Okay, here's how you crack the code. If the object appears to move in the same direction that the X-ray machine moved, then it's on the lingual or tongue side. If it moves in the opposite direction of the machine, it's on the buccal or cheek side. Same lingual, opposite buccal. That's it. That's the slob rule. And this diagram just illustrates it perfectly. Look at diagram A. From that straight-on view, the two objects, one on the cheek side, one on the tongue side, they look like they're right on top of each other. But now look at diagram B. The dentist shifts the X-ray beam. See how the objects now look like they've separated in the final image? The one on the cheek side moved opposite to the machine's shift, while the one on the tongue side moved in the same direction. This is an effect called parallax. It's the same reason that things close to you seem to fly by when you're looking out a car window, while mountains in the distance barely seem to move at all. So let's go all the way back to our original mystery. To solve it, a dentist would just take a second X-ray from a slightly different angle and then compare the two. By seeing which way that little piece of metal appears to move compared to the teeth, they can use the slob rule to know for sure if they need to go in from the cheek side or the tongue side. And just like that, case closed.
Okay, so solving the mystery is one thing, but any good detective needs to be able to clearly and accurately report their findings. And in dentistry, that means using a very specific and universal language.
It's called descriptive terminology. It's basically a standardized vocabulary that lets dental professionals describe exactly what they're seeing, its appearance, its location, its size, to make sure everyone is quite literally on the same page. Two of the most important terms in this whole language are radiolucent and radioopaque. Anything that's radiolucent shows up as dark or black because the X-rays pass right through it, like with soft tissue or a cavity. On the flip side, anything that's radioopaque appears light or white because dense things like bone, enamel, or fillings are blocking the X-rays. Let's see this in action. The image on the left shows a dark, radiolucent lesion down at the tooth's root. That darkness is a signal that there's been a loss of bone. Now compare that to the image on the right, which shows a bright white, radioopaque lesion. That indicates an area of unusually dense bone. Just by seeing light versus dark, the story really starts to unfold. But it's not just about black and white. The shape and the structure of what the dentist finds can provide even more clues about what's going on. For instance, over on the left, you're seeing a diagram of a unilocular lesion. It's just a single, well-defined compartment, which often suggests a slow-growing benign process. On the right, though, we see a multilocular lesion. See how it has all these multiple, almost bubbly-looking compartments? Well, that can be a sign of a more aggressive growth pattern, so the shape itself is a critical piece of the puzzle. So, as we wrap up our investigation, it becomes really clear that reading these images is an incredible skill that goes way beyond just, seeing shapes on a film. And this is why it is so critical. This shared language isn't just academic jargon. It is a vital tool for patient safety. It makes sure that every single professional, from the hygienist to a specialist across the country, is looking at the same evidence and speaking the exact same language. In the end, a dental X-ray is so much more than just a picture. It's a complex, coded map of a three-dimensional space. And to interpret it correctly, you have to be a detective, using clever rules like slob to figure out depth and a really precise language to report what you find. So the next time you see a dental X-ray, you'll have a whole new appreciation for the hidden story it tells. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What mysteries are lying just beneath the surface, waiting for a dental detective to solve them? Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to talk about something that's a super important part of any dental checkup, the X-ray. It's this amazing tool that lets your dental team see everything that's happening below the surface. But let's be real. For a lot of people, it can also be a source of some serious stress. So, okay, let's dive into this and figure out how we can make it a way better experience for everybody. So, does this question hit a little too close to home? You know that feeling. The lead apron comes out and you know exactly what's coming next. For so many of us, the idea of holding that little sensor in your mouth is, well, it's not exactly fun, right?
And look, if that's you, you are so not alone. It's a really common challenge. But here's the good news. Dental professionals have this entire toolkit of strategies and different technologies to help. And that means there's a solution for pretty much every single patient and every situation. So let's kick things off with the biggest, most common hurdle, that powerful, totally involuntary reaction we all know as the gag reflex. Seriously, understanding what it is and why it happens is the absolute first step to getting it under control.
Okay, so at its core, the gag reflex is just your body's natural defense system. It's there to protect your airway, which is a good thing. It gets triggered when certain spots get touched. We're talking about the soft palate at the very back of your mouth or the back part of your tongue. And what's really interesting is that the triggers aren't just about physical touch. They actually break down into two main types. You've got your tactile triggers, which come from the X-ray sensor actually touching those sensitive spots. But then you've got psychogenic triggers, and these actually start in your mind. This means that sometimes just the anxiety or even the thought of the procedure is enough to set that reflex off. So, knowing all that, how do dental professionals actually help you get through it? Well, this brings us to their amazing toolkit of techniques, which you'll see is just as much about psychology as it is about technical skill. Let's see how they build a better, calmer experience. And it often starts with the person who's actually taking the X-ray. A confident, patient, and really understanding attitude from them can instantly bring a patient's anxiety way down, which, as we just learned, is a huge trigger. That calm approach, it can literally make all the difference in the world. And you can see they have a really methodical approach. It's not just random. First, they focus on building trust and explaining exactly what's going to happen, so no surprises. Then they use strategic sequencing. This is so smart. They'll often start with the easier X-rays at the front of your mouth to build your confidence before they move to the trickier ones in the back. And finally, there's the gentle but firm placement. Sometimes they'll even show you with their finger where the sensor's going to go just to get you used to the feeling.
Of course, a sensitive gag reflex is just one of many, many things to consider. A truly great dental team knows how to adapt their approach for all kinds of different patient needs.
For patients with developmental or physical disabilities, it's all about being flexible. In some cases, those little intraoral sensors just aren't going to work. A caregiver can also play a huge role here, helping to reassure the patient or even assisting in the process. And of course, they always wear a lead apron for their own safety. Now, when it comes to kids, that's a whole different ballgame. Patient management is everything. We're talking about using kid-friendly language, showing them what's going to happen on a doll first, and of course, using equipment that's actually sized for their smaller mouths. It's all about making it a positive experience from the start.
And what about during a root canal? Well, X-rays are absolutely essential, but with all the dental dams and instruments in the way, it gets really tricky. That's where these cool specialized tools like the EndoRay holder come into play. It's designed specifically to fit around all that equipment and get the sensor in the perfect spot for those supercritical images.
So you might be thinking, why on earth would you need to X-ray someone who doesn't have any teeth? Well, what's hiding under the gums is a whole other story. Imaging for edentulous patients is crucial for finding things like old root tips left behind or spotting impacted teeth, lesions, and checking out the quality of the bone, which is so important for planning things like dentures or implants. So what happens when putting a sensor inside the mouth just is not going to happen, whether it's because of a really severe gag reflex, a disability, or something else? Is there a plan B? Oh, you bet there is. And it's an incredible solution. It's called extraoral imaging. And yeah, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The imaging sensor is placed outside of the mouth. This completely bypasses all the challenges of trying to get that little sensor placed inside. The most common example, and you've probably seen one of these, is the panoramic X-ray. It's that big machine that slowly rotates around your head. This is the go-to alternative when a traditional full-mouth series of individual X-rays just isn't going to work for a patient. And you would not believe what these things can see. They give dentists the big picture, letting them evaluate these huge areas of the jaw and skull all at once. They are fantastic for assessing growth and development in kids, finding those pesky impacted wisdom teeth, and detecting a whole range of diseases or conditions that might otherwise get missed. Okay, so we've looked at the professional's toolkit, And we've seen all the cool technology. But there is one more piece to this puzzle, and honestly, it's the most important one. And that piece is you. Let's wrap up by focusing on your role in this partnership.
When it comes right down to it, this is what it's all about. The absolute best dental care happens when an informed patient and a caring, skilled professional team up. It's a total collaboration. And when both sides are working together like that, comfortable and successful outcomes are practically a guarantee.
And the real key to that collaboration? Communication. It is your single most powerful tool. If you're nervous, if you have a bad gag reflex, if you had a terrible experience years ago, you have to tell them. Sharing your concerns is what allows them to pull the right strategies from their toolkit to help you through it.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Now that you know all this, what's one thing you can do to partner even better with your dental team the next time you're in that chair? Thanks so much for watching.
You know when you're at the dentist and they take that x-ray? For like ever, it's just been a flat 2D picture. But what if they could see everything? That's exactly what 3D dental imaging is all about. It's this amazing technology that gives dentists a full three-dimensional look inside our mouths.
I mean, think about it. Is your head flat? No. Is your jaw flat? Definitely not. And your teeth? Come on. So why have we been looking at them with flat pictures for so long? That's the big question, right? Because a flat X-ray, well, it can miss the full story.
So to really get why this 3D stuff is such a big deal, we gotta look at what came before it. Let's talk about the old school X-ray that pretty much all of us have had and figure out why it was time for a change. Okay, so a regular 2D X-ray, it's kind of like a flat map of a city. It's useful, sure, but imagine all the skyscrapers, the streets, the subway tunnels, all squashed onto one single piece of paper. Things get hidden, right? Important stuff like nerves, tooth roots, and bone can end up overlapping, and your dentist can't see exactly where everything is. With 3D imaging, poof, that problem just disappeared.
All right, so how do we make that leap? How do we go from that flat, squashed map to a full-on 3D model of your head? Well, it's all thanks to this incredible technology called cone beam computed tomography. Yeah, it's a mouthful, so we just call it CBCT. Let's dive into how it works. You'd think it would be super complicated, but it's actually really quick. You just sit or stand still for a few seconds, and this machine does a single smooth spin around your head. That's it. As it's spinning, a special cone-shaped beam is snapping hundreds of pictures from every possible angle. Then, the really cool part happens. The software takes all those images and, like a high-tech construction crew, stacks them all up to build this perfect, detailed 3D model.
So to really wrap our heads around how these images get so detailed, we gotta talk about the basic building block. You know how a 2D photo is made of pixels, right? Just tiny little squares of color? Well, in 3D, we have something called voxels. And a voxel is basically just a pixel with depth. Think of it as a tiny little 3D cube of information.
The best way to picture it is to think of Legos. Each voxel is like a single, tiny, digital Lego block. The software then takes millions, literally millions, of these blocks and clicks them together in exactly the right spot. And what you get is this stunningly accurate 3D model of your jaw, your teeth, all your facial structures. It's wild.
Okay, so we've got this incredible 3D model. Now what? What does your dentist actually do with it? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. This is where the tech goes from just being cool to being absolutely critical. It basically gives your dentist superpowers.
Seriously, this is a total game changer for so many things in dentistry. Let's talk about implants. Before, it was a bit of an educated guess. Now, a dentist can see the exact thickness of your jawbone. They can see the precise path of a nerve running through there and plan the implant placement down to the millimeter to make sure they don't touch it. It takes a really complex surgery and turns it into a super safe, predictable plan. And it's the same for braces, tricky root canals, jaw surgery, you name it. It's like having a perfect GPS roadmap before you even start the journey.
And at the end of the day, what does all this tech mean for you, the patient? Well, it means your dentist can make a much more accurate diagnosis. It means your treatment is planned out way better. And it means fewer surprises when you're in the chair. It all adds up to safer procedures and, honestly, just better results.
Now, look, no technology is a magic bullet, right? It's not perfect. So, to be fair, we got to look at both sides of the coin. Let's get into the pros and cons. So, on the pro side, the accuracy is just incredible. And compared to a big medical CT scan you'd get at a hospital, the radiation dose is way, way lower. But
there's always a but. The radiation is still a bit higher than your standard simple 2D X-ray. That's why your dentist isn't going to use it for every routine checkup. Plus, these machines are big and they're expensive, so you're not going to find one in every single dental office, at least not yet.
And that really brings us back to the main idea, doesn't it? As this tech keeps getting better, we're getting closer to a type of dental care that just makes more sense. It matches how we're actually built. I mean, everything about your mouth is 3D. So, shouldn't your dental scan be too?
You know the drill. You're sitting in the dentist chair, they drape that heavy apron over your lap, and you bite down on a little piece of plastic while they aim a machine at your cheek. But what's actually going on in that moment? Well, today, we're diving into the incredible story of the dental X-ray, from a really dangerous discovery to a cornerstone of modern medicine. So, let's get into it. First, we'll explore why dentists even need these X-ray superpowers. Then, we'll meet the pioneers who figured this all out, often at a terrible, terrible personal cost. After that, we'll break down the nitty-gritty science of how radiation actually affects our bodies. And finally, we'll weigh the risk versus the reward right here in the 21st century dental office. All right, first up, why do we even need these images? It turns out what your dentist can see with just their eyes is only a tiny, tiny fraction of the real story of your oral health. And it all comes back to that one question we've all had, right? Why do they step out of the room for something that seems so routine? The answer is all about the power and the historical danger of what that little button unleashes. But first, let's see what that power actually shows us. Think of your dentist as a detective. Seriously, X-rays are their #1 tool for investigating everything that's happening below the surface. They can spot cavities hiding between your teeth, see cysts or even extra teeth buried in your jawbone, and check on how everything's developing long before it becomes a visible problem. Without these pictures, they'd be flying completely blind, and tiny issues could turn into massive problems. So how did we get this incredible tool? Well, the story is pretty amazing. It's full of brilliant discovery, but it's also a serious cautionary tale about the price of progress. It all started way back in 1838 with a simple vacuum tube built by a guy named Heinrich Geissler. Decades later, in 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen was messing around with one of these tubes when he noticed a screen across the room started glowing. He'd stumbled upon a mysterious new ray, he called it the X-ray because he had no idea what it was, and he famously took that spooky image of his wife's hand. And get this, just 1 year later, an American dentist named C. Edmund Kells brought this brand new tech right into the dental office.
Dr. Kells was a true innovator, a real trailblazer. But here's the thing. Nobody knew about the dangers of radiation. Not a clue. So to get a good, clear image, he'd hold the film plates in his patients' mouths with his own fingers, soaking up dose after dose of radiation day in and day out. He was pushing the boundaries of medicine, completely unaware of the invisible damage being done to his body.
And this is the painful price he paid. The very tool he championed was slowly destroying him. The story of Dr. Kellis is absolutely tragic, but it's such a crucial part of this history. It forced the entire scientific community to stop and ask a critical question. What was this invisible energy actually doing to us on a cellular level? So, to understand what happened to Dr. Kells, and to understand how we stay safe today, we have to shrink down, way, way down to the atomic level. This gets us into the invisible science of what was happening inside his cells.
Okay, meet the main villain in our story, the free radical. The easiest way to think of it is like a little agent of chaos. It's an unstable atom with a single, lonely electron. That makes it desperate to be stable again, so it goes on a rampage, stealing an electron from any molecule it bumps into. This sets off a destructive chain reaction inside a cell.
So how are these little troublemakers born? It's a pretty simple 3-step process, actually. First, an X-ray photon zips into a cell, and bam, it hits a water molecule. And remember, our cells are mostly water. Second, the energy from that collision knocks an electron right off the water molecule. And third, what's left behind? That's our unstable, electron-hungry free radical. Now, this whole process leads to 2 main theories about how radiation causes damage. You've got the direct theory, which is when an X-ray gets lucky and scores a direct hit on something super important in the cell, like its DNA. But that's pretty rare. What's way more common is the indirect theory. This is where the X-rays create those free radicals from water, and then those free radicals go on to do the damage. So the key thing to remember is that water usually acts as the middleman for most of the damage. Okay, so that was the scary part. I know. But this story doesn't end there. Not even close. The sacrifices of pioneers like Dr. Kells led to a total revolution in safety, which has completely flipped the script on the risk. So how exactly do we stay safe today? Well, it comes down to a handful of brilliant innovations. We have stable X-ray tubes that give a predictable, controlled dose. We've got incredibly fast digital sensors that need just a tiny fraction of the radiation they used in the old days. We use something called collimation to narrow the X-ray beam down to just the size of a postage stamp, so only the target is exposed. And of course, there's that heavy lead apron, which is basically your personal shield. So with all that new technology, what's the actual risk today? Well, the potential risk of a routine dental X-ray causing a fatal cancer is estimated to be about 3 in 1 million. Now that's an incredibly small number, but what does it really mean in the real world? This is where it all clicks into place. Let's put that risk in perspective. The chance of a fatal outcome from a dental X-ray is about the same as smoking 1.5 cigarettes or riding your bike for 10 miles. It's actually less risky than driving 300 miles in a car. We take on these kinds of risks every single day, most of the time without even thinking about it. And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway, the bottom line. It's all about that tiny, managed risk you take for a huge diagnostic reward. Yeah, there's a risk, but it's vanishingly small. The benefit of finding a hidden infection or a cyst or decay before it gets bad, benefits that can save your teeth and maybe even your life, that benefit just vastly outweighs the minimal risk. You know, the story of the dental X-ray isn't just about dentistry. It's a really powerful reminder of this constant balancing act we do between our relentless search for knowledge and our absolute need for safety. It went from a mysterious glowing screen in a lab to a precise diagnostic tool, and it shows our incredible ability to harness powerful forces for good, all while learning from the past to protect our future. All right, let's pull back the lead apron on a piece of technology almost all of us have experienced, but let's be honest, very few of us actually understand. The dental X-ray. What is really going on behind that familiar whirring sound? You know the drill. You're sitting back in the chair, they put that heavy vest on you, and then they aim this strange device at your cheek. You hear a quick little beep, and that's it. But what just happened? I mean, what really went on inside that machine in that split second? Well, the secret ingredient is a really special kind of energy called X radiation. The easiest way to think about it is like a super-powered flashlight. Its light can pass right through soft stuff, like your gums and cheeks, but it gets stopped by the denser things like teeth and bone. And that's what creates that hidden picture of everything going on underneath. Okay, so to really get how we can create an X-ray pretty much on demand, we've got to do a super quick review of the basic building blocks of, well, everything. We're talking matter and energy. It all boils down to the atom. You've got the nucleus in the middle, sure, but for our story today, the absolute star of the show is that tiny particle just zipping around the outside, the electron. Seriously, that little guy is the key player in this whole thing. And here's the tiny, tiny change that makes all the difference. A normal, stable atom is neutral. It's got the same number of protons and electrons, so it's balanced. But if you can hit that atom with enough force to knock one of its electrons clean out of orbit, it's not balanced anymore. It becomes a charged ion. And that process, ionization, is the whole idea behind what we call ionizing radiation. So now that we've got the basic physics down, let's step inside the factory. That tube head the dentist points at your face, it's not just a camera. It's basically a miniature particle accelerator, a highly specialized factory that makes only one product, X-ray photons. So here's the assembly line in action. First, electricity heats up a tiny tungsten filament, which boils off a cloud of electrons. The second you hit that exposure button, a massive voltage difference acts like a giant slingshot. It launches that cloud of electrons across a vacuum tube at nearly half the speed of light, and they just slam into a small tungsten target at the other end. Now, when those electrons hit the target, you'd think the result would be pretty efficient, right? Nope. It's actually shockingly inefficient. A full 99% of all that incredible kinetic energy is instantly converted into nothing but waste heat. Only one tiny, precious percent actually becomes the X-rays we need. That's why the whole thing is bathed in insulating oil, to absorb all that heat. And get this, even that 1% isn't all the same. It's actually a mix of two different types of radiation, which are created by slightly different atomic collisions. But for the person taking the X-ray, what's way more important is how they can control this beam. So now we've created this incredibly powerful beam of energy. But how do we control it so we get a crystal clear diagnostic image instead of, just a useless fuzzy blob? Let's head over to the control panel and see how the operator dials in the perfect shot. It really just comes down to two main dials. First, you have kilovoltage, or kVp. That controls the quality of the beam. Think of it as its penetrating power, or how hard it hits. Then you have milliamperage, or MA, and that controls the quantity, literally the total number of X-rays being made. It's a classic trade-off, quality versus quantity. Okay, so let's look at the cause and effect here. If you crank up the kVp, the power, the image gets darker. But look what else happens. It actually decreases the contrast, which gives you more shades of gray. Now, if you just turn up the milliamperage, the quantity, the image also gets darker, but the contrast doesn't really change. It's a really delicate balancing act to get it just right. So why would a dentist even want to mess with the contrast? Well, it all depends on what they're looking for. A high contrast image gives you these really sharp, distinct blacks and whites, which is perfect for spotting a cavity. But if you're looking for something more subtle, like bone loss from gum disease, you actually want a low contrast image with lots and lots of shades of gray. The tool has to be tailored for the job.
So the perfect beam has been created, it's been aimed, and now it's time for its final incredible journey. We're talking about the milliseconds it takes for it to travel through your jaw. What actually happens when these little packets of energy meet the atoms inside your body?
So, every single one of those photons has one of four possible fates. Most of them are going to scatter, and a good chunk will get absorbed. But what we're really interested in is that tiny fraction that manages to pass all the way through without interacting with anything at all. Because believe it or not, those are the ones that actually make the picture. All right, quick quiz. First scenario, an X-ray photon zips right through your cheek, misses every single atom along the way, and hits the sensor on the other side. What do we call that? That is called no interaction. And these photons are the true heroes of the story. They're the ones responsible for creating all the dark parts of the X-ray, the spots that represent soft tissue or empty space that the beam just sailed right through. Okay, next up, what about the most common thing that happens? This is where a photon comes in, collides with an outer shell electron, knocks it loose, and then kind of ricochets off in a new direction with less energy. That one is Compton scatter. It happens the majority of the time, and it's the main reason we have scatter radiation, which isn't great because it can create a sort of fog on the image. So it's the most common interaction, but it doesn't really help us see anything. And last one, what if the photon doesn't scatter at all? What if it makes a direct hit on a really tightly bound inner shell electron and transfers all of its energy, just completely vanishing in the process? That's the photoelectric effect, and it's the other critical interaction we need for a good image. So let's put all these pieces of the puzzle together. When you get right down to it, a dental X-ray is just a shadow map, created by this beautiful little dance between all these different atomic level interactions. So let's recap the big stuff. Dental X-rays are born from a super high-speed collision of electrons into a tiny target. The whole process creates a ton of heat just to make 1% of useful radiation. The person taking the X-ray uses kilovoltage for the beam's power and milliamperage for its intensity. And that final picture? It's really just a detailed shadowgram, painted by the photons that got absorbed and the photons that passed right on through. So the next time you're sitting in that chair and you hear that little whirring sound, you'll know. It's not just a machine, it's a controlled chain reaction of atomic physics all happening in a blink of an eye to help you out. It really makes you wonder, right? What other everyday technology that we take for granted is hiding such incredible physics just under the surface? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to go behind the scenes on something pretty much all of us have gone through, but probably never really thought about: the dental X-ray. Yeah, we've all been there, right? Sitting in that chair, you hear that little whirring sound, then that quick flash. But have you ever stopped to think, what is that flash? What happens in that split second? And where does that X-ray actually go? Well, today we're going to follow that hidden journey. It's a wild story, really. It starts with just a spark of energy, and it ends up being a super important diagnosis. And in between, just a whole lot of physics, a bit of geometry, and honestly, some pretty serious detective work. So yeah, let's dive in. Okay, so first things first, our story doesn't actually start in your mouth. Nope, it begins way back, deep inside that heavy metal arm of the X-ray machine. There's a part in there called the tube head, and that's where all the magic, or, the physics really happens. So inside this tube head, the absolute star of the show is a metal called tungsten. This stuff is just incredibly dense, almost as dense as gold, actually, and it's packed with 74 electrons, which you'll see is the key to this whole thing. But it's not just about being dense. Tungsten has this kind of a superpower that makes it perfect for this crazy intense job. And this is its superpower. Just look at that number, over 3,400 degrees Celsius. To put that in perspective, that's more than double the temperature of molten lava. It's insane. That is tungsten's melting point, and it's the highest of any metal on Earth. And that heat resistance is precisely why it's the chosen one. It can take all that crazy energy needed to make an X-ray and not just, vaporize. All right, so we've got our super powerful X-ray beam. Awesome. But making it, that's only half the battle. Now you've got to aim the thing, and with some serious precision. Getting a clear image isn't as simple as point and shoot. Oh no, it's a game of angles, a game of geometry. One of the classic ways they do this is called the bisecting technique. Now, I know it sounds super technical, but just think of it like this. You've got the angle of the tooth, right? And then you've got the angle of the little sensor they put in your mouth. This technique is all about finding the exact middle point between those two angles and aiming the X-ray beam right at that imaginary line. It's literally about splitting the difference to get an image that's true to life. But here's the catch. This whole technique is super, super sensitive. If you're off by just a tiny bit, you get something called dimensional distortion. That's really just a fancy way of saying the picture gets all warped. And a warped picture, that can lead to a totally wrong diagnosis. For example, check this out. If the angle of the beam is too steep, coming from too high up, you get what's called a foreshortened image. The tooth looks all squashed and stumpy. And the real danger here? An image like this could completely hide a serious problem, like an infection or a tiny fracture that's right at the tip of the root. And then there's the other side of the coin. If the angle is too flat, you get elongation. Now the tooth looks all stretched out, kind of like you're looking at it in a funhouse mirror. And again, a distorted image like this is pretty much useless for a diagnosis. So you can see, it all boils down to precision. Getting that angle just right is everything. Okay. So all the little pictures have been taken, one by one. But now comes the next big challenge, putting them all together. You can end up with a full set of like 18 or even more of these little films, and someone has to arrange them into a perfect, coherent map of the entire mouth. The training manuals for dental professionals have this perfect, simple instruction for this part. It just says, mount like puzzle pieces. And that's exactly what it feels like. Every single little X-ray is one piece of a much bigger picture, and they all have to snap into place just right. And putting them in that mount isn't just about being neat and tidy. It's actually super important for a bunch of reasons. I mean, it stops you from mixing up the left side of the mouth with the right, which would be bad. It protects the films themselves, and it even helps the dentist see better by blocking out extra light. It just makes the whole process way safer and way more accurate. The way they do it is actually a really cool mix of simple clues and some serious anatomy knowledge. It starts with this little raised dot on every film, just to get the basic up and down orientation. But then the real skill comes in. The technician uses their knowledge of anatomical landmarks, like the upward curve of your lower jaw, which has a name, the curve of Spee, to place every single one of those puzzle pieces exactly where it's supposed to go. All right, the puzzle is complete. The map is laid out, and now the real detective work begins. It's time to read the story that's hidden in all those shades of black, white, and gray. So one of the first things a trained eye is looking for are the dark spots. The technical term is radiolucent. Just think of it like this. Darkness means the X-rays just sailed right through that area. And that's usually a red flag. It means something that should be dense, like healthy bone or tooth, has been replaced by something less dense, which could be a sign of an infection, a cyst, or an abscess. And then, of course, they're also looking for the exact opposite radio-opaque areas. These are the bright white spots. And whiteness means the X-rays got blocked, kind of like a big rock in a stream. This points to something that's denser than the tissue around it. Now, that could be something simple, like a filling, or even just a harmless little patch of extra dense bone. So the professional scans the entire set, systematically, tooth by tooth, looking for these little clues. and the clues can be incredibly specific, like a sharp, dark line on the crown of a tooth. That's a classic sign of a fracture. A neat little dark circle right at the tip of a root. That's the textbook sign of a certain type of cyst. Every problem has its own signature, its own telltale sign. So, after all this work, generating the beam, getting the angle right, putting the puzzle together, who makes the final call? Who actually figures out what it all means? This really brings us to the most critical step of the whole journey.
It's a really important question because the answer shows you just how much teamwork is involved. This isn't just a one-person show.
It really is a team effort. You have the dental hygienist, who's the technical expert, right? They're the ones taking the pictures, making sure they're clear, putting that whole puzzle together. But, and this is the key takeaway, it's the dentist who makes the diagnosis. They're the one who looks at all that evidence and says, okay, here's what's going on, and here's what we're going to do about it. And just like that, the journey's complete, all the way from a spark of superheated tungsten to a critical diagnosis. It's a pretty incredible process when you think about it. And it just goes to show you that behind that simple little flash in the dentist's office, there's a whole world of science and skill and incredible precision. And it kind of makes you wonder, right? If a simple black and white picture of our teeth can tell such a detailed story, what other hidden stories are our bodies just waiting to tell? All right, let's talk about a technology that literally sees right through us. We're going to peel back the layers on the story of how a mysterious invisible ray completely changed medicine and, yeah, became a totally normal part of your dental checkup. Okay, I bet this looks familiar to just about everyone. You know the drill, right? You're in the chair, they drape that super heavy lead vest over you, and you have to bite down on that kind of awkward piece of plastic. It feels so routine now, but what you're looking at is a window into a totally hidden world. I mean, think about it. Your dentist can look at your teeth, sure, but they can only see the surface. The real story, a lot of the time, is happening underneath the gums, inside the tooth itself. So this whole technology was basically invented to answer one huge question: what are we missing? And that brings us right to the core power of the X-ray, the incredible ability to see the unseen. Okay, check this out. On the left, you've got a tooth that looks, perfectly fine. Nothing to worry about. But then, you look at the X-ray on the right. Whoa. It reveals this hidden secret. A post under the crown is failing. This is a perfect example of a serious problem that you would have absolutely no way of knowing about without this tech. You can really think of it like dental detective work. X-rays are the tool dentists use to hunt for clues you just can't see. Things like hidden decay or caries, cysts, even extra teeth hiding in your jaw. They're on the lookout for impacted teeth, little fractures in the jaw, problems with fillings or crowns you already have. It's just an absolutely essential tool for getting the full picture of what's going on in there. So how did we get this incredible power to see inside ourselves? Well, it wasn't just one eureka moment. It was actually this rapid-fire series of breakthroughs from some brilliant and, as you'll see, very brave pioneers. So our story kicks off in the 1870s, with scientists fooling around with these glowing vacuum tubes. Then, bam, November 8th, 1895, a guy named Wilhelm Röntgen discovers a mysterious new kind of ray. He had no idea what it was, so he called it X radiation. The X literally stood for unknown. And after that, things just took off. We're talking a lightning speed. Just a few weeks later, a German dentist, Otto Walkhoff, takes the very first dental X-ray on himself. And get this, the exposure took a grueling 25 minutes. Can you even imagine sitting still for that long? And this is the image that started everything. You're looking at the hand of Röntgen's wife, Bertha. You can so clearly see the bones, and right there, her wedding ring. It's kind of a ghostly image, isn't it? And it took a full 15 minutes to expose. This was the very first X-ray image ever made, and it was about to change the world forever.
But, this incredible discovery, it had a really dark side. These early pioneers, they just had no idea how dangerous radiation was. Take C. Edmund Kells, an American dentist. To get a good shot, he would hold the X-ray films in his patient's mouth with his own fingers. He paid a terrible price for his dedication to this new science. By the time he was 50, he developed cancer and eventually lost his fingers, then his hand, and then his entire arm. It's just a truly stark reminder of the human cost that sometimes comes with progress. So, in honor of sacrifices like his, let's take a closer look at the science they helped bring to light. How does an X-ray machine actually work? What's going on inside that tube?
Okay, so in simple terms, X radiation is basically a beam of super high energy light, for lack of a better word. It's a form of electromagnetic radiation, and it's made when a stream of really fast electrons smashes into a metal target. And that all happens inside an X-ray tube. And this is where all the magic happens, inside the X-ray tube. You can think of it as the heart of the machine. It really only has two main parts. You've got the cathode, that's the negative side, and the anode, which is the positive side. The entire game is to get electrons to fly from that cathode over to the anode. And it all happens in three surprisingly simple steps. First, you heat things up. The cathode has a tiny tungsten filament, kind of like an old-school light bulb. You heat it up and it creates this cloud of electrons. Step 2, accelerate. You hit them with a massive jolt of high voltage, which flings those electrons across the tube at nearly half the speed of light. Insane, right? And finally, step 3, collide. That super fast stream of electrons smashes into a tungsten target on the anode. All that energy of motion, that kinetic energy, gets instantly converted into X-ray photons.
But here is a wild fact about all this. The whole process is, believe it or not, unbelievably inefficient. A staggering 99.8% of all that energy is just lost as heat. That means less than 0.2%, not even 1%, of the energy actually becomes the X-rays that make the image. All that work for such a tiny result?
Okay, so we've made the X-rays, but now you have to capture the image, right? And back in the day, that was a whole other messy challenge. We're talking dark rooms, smelly chemicals, and just so many ways for things to go wrong.
Yeah, before digital came along, developing an X-ray was this whole complicated dance. You had to dip the film in a developer to turn the exposed bits black, then a water rinse to stop it, then a fixer to wash away the unexposed parts and harden the image, then another wash to get all the chemicals off, and then you had to let it dry completely. Man, it was a long way from the instant pictures we get on a computer screen today.
And with all those steps, you can bet there were a million ways for things to get messed up. For example, if you just put the film in backwards during the X-ray, you'd get this, a totally useless waffle pattern. Gotta do it all over again.
Or how about this? Sometimes the films would just stick together in the chemical processor, and then you'd end up with this, a completely ruined image, which means, yep, another X-ray for the poor patient.
And this one is kind of my favorite error, just because it looks so cool. Static electricity. In a really dry darkroom, just a tiny spark of static could create these incredible, lightning-like patterns on the film. Beautiful to look at, sure, but absolutely frustrating when you're trying to see a cavity. And then, finally, in 1987, everything changed. Digital imaging showed up, and suddenly all those messy chemicals in darkrooms were replaced by the clean, instant, amazing precision of pixels and sensors.
So, okay, we've come a really long way from those brave and sometimes unlucky pioneers and their messy darkrooms. So why does this technology, which is over 100 years old, still matter so much today?
Because when you strip it all away, the X-ray is still this magical window into our own bodies. It lets doctors and dentists see what's really going on inside us without ever making a cut. I mean, from a simple broken bone to a serious hidden infection, X-rays give them a roadmap. It's a guide for diagnosis and treatment that, not that long ago, was basically pure science fiction.
When you think about it, going from that first ghostly image of a hand to the incredibly detailed digital maps of our bodies we have today, wow. The story of the X-ray is just an amazing testament to human curiosity and ingenuity. And it really leaves you with an exciting question, right? As our technology keeps getting better and better, what other invisible worlds are just waiting for us to see them?
All right, you know the drill, right? You're sitting back in the dentist chair, they throw that heavy lead apron over you, and then they swing this weird cone-shaped machine right up to your jaw. There's a little beep, and poof, it's done.
But have you ever stopped to wonder how that machine just took a picture through you? I mean, how can it see through your skin and bone to get this perfect image of your teeth? It feels like some kind of magic trick, but it's not. It's just pure, amazing physics.
And that's the journey we're going to take today. We are going to follow the life of an X-ray,
right from its birth inside an atom all the way to that final picture that tells your dentist what's going on. So, let's get into it.
Okay, so to get how the picture works, we first need to understand the flash that takes it. And for that, we've got to go inside the machine itself, inside the tube head. You can basically think of it as a super specialized photon gun.
So, inside this glass vacuum tube, you've got two key players. First, there's the cathode. It's got a negative charge, and its only job, its whole purpose, is to supply the ammunition, which in this case is electrons. Then on the other side, you have the anode. It's got a positive charge, and it's the target. Its job? To stop those electrons, dead in their tracks.
So how do we get those electrons from the source to the target? Well, it all starts when a little tungsten filament inside the cathode heats up, like really hot. This heat actually makes a cloud of electrons boil right off the surface. It's a cool process called thermionic emission. And then, the second the dentist hits that button, a massive high-voltage circuit kicks in. Bam! This creates this intense electrical force that just launches that electron cloud across the tube.
And when I say launches, I mean it. These things are moving unbelievably fast. We're talking about going from a dead stop to nearly half the speed of light in a tiny gap that's less than an inch wide. It's insane. And then wham! The electrons just slam into this little tungsten target over in the anode, carrying a ton of kinetic energy.
Okay, but here's the crazy part. For all that incredible speed and energy, the whole process is, well, it's super inefficient. Get this, only 1% of all that energy actually becomes useful X-rays. The other 99%, it's just instantly converted into heat, a lot of heat. That's actually why the target is stuck in a big copper stem, to soak up all that heat and pull it away.
So, out of that violent, super hot collision, kinetic energy from an electron gets transformed into something totally new. A brand new particle is born. This is our hero, our protagonist, the X-ray photon. And now its journey is just getting started.
So what exactly is an X-ray photon? Well, first off, it's not the electron anymore. Think of it as a tiny, weightless packet of pure energy. It has no mass, no electrical charge. It's just this little bundle of pure energy zipping along in a straight line at the speed of light.
And this little photon, it's got some wild properties that make it perfect for what we need. For one, it's totally invisible. It can also pass right through solid stuff. And here's the most important part, it can cause something called ionization. That's basically where it can knock an electron out of another atom it hits. That last one is the key to everything. It's how we get an image, but it's also the reason why radiation exposure has to be so carefully controlled.
Right, so this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? We've got this invisible beam of pure energy flying straight through your cheek. How in the world does that turn into a black and white picture of your tooth?
It all comes down to one word: density. Imagine you're throwing a bunch of tiny balls at your face. As these X-ray photons travel, some of them are going to be stopped and some are going to get through. The soft, less dense stuff, like your gums and cheeks, they don't block many photons. So the photons pass right through and hit the sensor on the other side, and that makes the picture dark. We call that radiolucent. But the really dense stuff, like bone or your super hard tooth enamel or a metal filling, that stuff absorbs or just flat out blocks the photons. Since no photons can get through to the sensor in those spots, they show up as white, and that's what we call radio-opaque.
So really, the image is just a shadow picture, a shadow graph created by all those different densities. But to get a really clear picture that a dentist can actually use, they need to be able to control that X-ray beam with incredible precision. And this is how they do it. There are basically two main dials they can turn. First is milliamperage, or MA. Think of this as the quantity of X-rays. The more MA, the more photons you're shooting, and the darker the overall picture gets. The other dial is kilovoltage, or kVp. This one controls the quality, how much penetrating power each photon has. Cranking up the kVp gives you more shades of gray in the image, which is perfect for spotting subtle things like early gum disease.
It's not just about the electricity, though. The physical shape of the machine matters a lot, too. For example, having a super tiny focal spot on that target inside the tube, that gives you a much sharper image with less of that fuzzy, blurry edge that dentists call penumbra. And using a longer cone, that part they aim at your face, makes sure the X-ray beams are nice and parallel. That means you get way less magnification and a truer picture of the tooth.
So you see, it's all a balancing act. By perfectly juggling all these things, the quantity of X-rays, their quality, the geometry of the machine, a dentist can turn this invisible beam into a powerful tool. A tool that makes the invisible visible and helps them find problems they'd never see with their own eyes. No, it's so easy to take this technology for granted, but it's actually the result of more than 100 years of incredible discovery, innovation, and yeah, sometimes real sacrifice.
It all kicked off back in 1895. A guy named Wilhelm Röntgen stumbles upon this mysterious new ray, and because he has no idea what it is, he calls it the X-ray, X for unknown. The amazing thing is, just 1 year later, a dentist in the US, C. Edmund Cales, is already using it on his patients. From there, things just took off. William Coolidge invented the modern X-ray tube we still basically use today in 1913, and then of course, digital imaging completely changed the game in 1987.
But being a pioneer like that, it came with a huge cost. See, back then, nobody, including Kells, had any idea just how dangerous this invisible energy really was. He would actually hold the little film packets in his patients' mouths with his own fingers, every day. The result was just tragic. He developed cancer that over time cost him his fingers, then his hand, and eventually his entire arm.
That story, it's a really powerful reminder of just how far we've come. Because we now understand the physics so well, we've been able to take what was once this dangerous, mysterious novelty and turn it into one of the safest, most essential tools in all of modern medicine.
Think about it. We went from a simple cloud of electrons to a detailed map of the inside of our own bodies. The story of the X-ray really shows how learning to control an invisible force can literally change everything. It kind of makes you wonder, right? What other invisible forces are out there that we're just starting to understand today, and how are they going to shape the medicine of tomorrow?
Have you ever really thought about a dental X-ray? How can a piece of plastic that looks totally blank suddenly reveal everything hidden inside your teeth? Well, today, we are pulling back the curtain on that little piece of analog magic. We're going to find out how invisible energy gets turned into one of the most important tools in dentistry. So, right off the bat, here's the big question. How do you develop an invisible picture? Think about it. The X-ray is taken, the film comes out of your mouth, and it looks like nothing. It's totally blank. So how in the world do we get from that empty-looking film to a super detailed image of teeth and bone? That's the puzzle we're here to solve. And here's the secret. The picture is already there. You just can't see it yet. It's hiding. The whole process of developing a film is basically a carefully choreographed chemical dance, and its only purpose is to bring that hidden image out into the light. And that invisible picture, it actually has a name. It's called the latent image. Now, this isn't ink, and it's not light. It's literally a pattern of stored energy, captured in the film the exact moment the X-ray zapped through the patient's jaw. Our job is to turn that energy pattern into something we can actually see, and that is where the darkroom comes in.
Okay, but before we can bring this latent image to life, we've got to understand the canvas it's painted on. So, what is a dental X-ray film, really? Let's break it down.
The best way to think about it is like a tiny, high-tech sandwich with 4 layers. Each one has a super important job. You've got a strong film base at the bottom for support. Then there's an adhesive layer to kind of glue everything together. On top of that, you have the absolute star of the show, the film emulsion. We'll talk way more about that in a second. And then finally, there's a thin protective layer on top, just to keep the whole thing from getting scratched.
Now listen, every layer is important, but the film emulsion, that is where all the action happens. This is the heart and soul of the film. It's the part that's actually sensitive to the X-ray radiation. So what makes this emulsion so special? Well, it's packed with millions of microscopic silver highlight crystals. Just picture them as these teeny, tiny energy sponges. When X-rays hit them, they just soak up and hold on to that energy. The more X-rays that hit a crystal, the more energy it stores. And that pattern of energized and non-energized crystals, that's our invisible latent image.
All right, so we've got our film, and it's holding this hidden pattern of energy. Now it's time for the main event, the darkroom dance. This is where chemistry takes the lead and transforms that stored energy into a real, visible, permanent image. Now, inside an automatic processor, this dance follows 5 very specific steps. First, the film takes a dip in the developer, which makes the image appear. Then, a quick rinse stops that process. Next, it goes into the fixer to make the image permanent. After that, a final wash gets rid of any leftover chemicals. And finally, it gets dried and ta-da, it's ready to view. Every single one of these steps has to be perfect. But let's simplify this. Out of all those steps, it really comes down to 2 key chemicals. Think of the developer as a detective. Its mission is to go in and find only the silver halide crystals that got hit with X-rays. And when it finds them, it turns them into black metallic silver. That's what makes the dark parts of the image appear. Then, right after, the fixer comes in. Think of the fixer as the cleanup crew. Its job is to find all the unexposed crystals, the ones that were protected by bone and teeth, and it just washes them away completely. That leaves the film clear in those spots and makes the whole image stable and permanent. So, the chemical dance is over. A picture has magically appeared out of what looked like nothing. But what are we actually looking at? Let's figure out how to decode this thing. You have to remember, an X-ray isn't really a photograph. It's more like a shadowgraph. It's a map of shadows. The black, white, and gray areas you see are a direct result of how dense the stuff was that the X-rays had to travel through to reach the film. And we use two main terms to read this shadow map. First, you have radiolucent areas. These look dark or black. This happened where X-rays just sailed right through stuff that isn't very dense, like your gums, or unfortunately, a cavity. On the flip side, you have radio-opaque areas. These look light or white. This is where really dense things like tooth enamel or a metal filling stopped the X-rays in their tracks, leaving the film underneath totally untouched. Now, this chemical dance we've been talking about is a really delicate performance. The timing, the temperature of the chemicals, how you handle the film, everything has to be just right. So what happens when somebody misses a step? Let's look at what happens when this beautiful dance goes wrong. You know, in our digital world, we're used to having an undo button. Well, with analog film, there's no such thing. One little mistake can make the whole X-ray completely unreadable. And you know what that means? The patient has to get another dose of radiation to take it all over again. The stakes are pretty high. Okay, time to play detective. Take a look at this film. You can see part of the image, but then there's this perfectly straight, totally clear border on one side. What on earth could cause that? Any ideas? That is a textbook case of developer cutoff. It means the developer chemical level was too low and that edge of the film never got submerged. So our detective, the developer, never even got a chance to work on those crystals. And when the detective doesn't do its job, the cleanup crew, the fixer, just comes in and washes everything away, leaving it completely blank. All right, here's our next case file. Two films went into the machine, but they came out stuck together. And where they were touching, there's this dark, sticky, ugly patch. What happened there? Yep. That's just a classic operator error called overlapped films. Someone fed the second film into the machine way too fast, right on the tail of the first one. When they stick together like that, the chemicals can't get to the film surfaces properly, and you're left with this underdeveloped, sticky mess. Okay, this one is my favorite. It's so weird. The picture of the teeth is pretty clear, but there's this strange geometric pattern, kind of like a tire tread or a waffle iron, stamped across the whole thing. What in the world is going on here? The answer is so cool because it actually teaches us about the film packet itself. This is a reversed film. It means the film was put in the patient's mouth backwards. See, inside every single film packet, there's a thin sheet of lead foil. It's there to absorb extra radiation, but if you put it in backwards, the X-rays have to go through that foil first, and they end up taking a picture of the foil's pattern right onto the film. And finally, we've got chemical contamination. This is what happens if you're not careful in the darkroom. If a drop of developer splashes on the film before it goes into the processor, it starts working early and creates dark spots. The detective got a head start. On the flip side, if a drop of fixer splashes on it, it washes away the crystals before they can even be developed, leaving light or white spots. The cleanup crew showed up way too early and ruined the party. When you see how much can go wrong, it really makes you appreciate a perfect X-ray. It's not just a picture, it's a testament to incredible precision. It's a small victory for a scientific craft that took over 100 years to perfect. And really, that brings us to a final thought. This whole complicated hands-on process, this chemical dance, this used to be the absolute peak of technology. Now, of course, we have digital sensors that give us an image instantly, with way less work and less radiation. It's so much better for everyone. But it does make you wonder, doesn't it? In our huge leap forward in convenience and speed, what have we gained? And what kind of artistry have we maybe lost along the way?
Have you ever sat in that dental chair, had that little piece of plastic put in your mouth, and then, like a minute later, the dentist is looking at a perfect map of your teeth? It feels like magic, right? But it's actually this super fascinating chemical journey.
So today, let's pull back the curtain and uncover the secret life of a traditional dental X-ray film. And this is the central mystery. Before it ever touches a single chemical, that film is holding an invisible picture of your teeth, a secret message written entirely by X-rays. So how in the world do we go from what looks like a blank piece of plastic to a super detailed diagnostic image? Let's dive in. All right, so our story kicks off with this invisible picture, but it's not really an image in the way we usually think of one. It's more like a blueprint, one that's drawn with pure energy, just waiting for the right chemical reaction to bring it all into focus. Okay, so the magic ingredient here, it's pretty amazing. The surface of the film is coated in a gelatin that's packed with millions and millions of these tiny silver halide crystals. These little guys are the microscopic workhorses that do all the heavy lifting. They're the ones that actually catch the X-rays. And this brings us to our first key term, the latent image. When X-rays pass through your jaw, they zap those silver halide crystals with energy. Think of it exactly like the undeveloped film from an old-school camera. The picture has been taken, but it's totally invisible to the naked eye. It's basically a ghost image, just waiting in the shadows for chemistry to bring it to life. All right, so we've got this invisible image, this pattern of stored energy. Now let's take a closer look at the physical film packet itself. I mean, how is it actually built to capture and protect that latent image in the first place? You can think of the film as this simple but totally brilliant four-layer sandwich. First, you've got a sturdy plastic base for support. Then there's an adhesive layer holding everything together. Next comes the star of the show, that all-important emulsion with the silver halide crystals. And finally, a thin protective coating on top. Every single layer has a crucial job to do. So here's how that invisible pattern actually forms. Dense things like a metal filling or your tooth enamel, they block a ton of X-rays, right? So fewer crystals behind them get zapped with energy. But the less dense stuff like your gums or the pulp deep inside your tooth, they let more X-rays pass right through, energizing a whole bunch of crystals. It's that contrast, that difference in energy that creates the foundation for the entire image. And now for the magic trick. We've got our film with its invisible image. It's time to take it into the darkroom, or what's more common these days, an automatic processor. This is where a series of chemical baths will finally turn that stored energy into a visible, permanent picture. So, this little film is about to go on a 5-step chemical journey. First up, it takes a dip in the developer, which is what turns those energized crystals black. Then, a quick water rinse hits the brakes on that reaction. Next, it goes into the fixer solution. This stuff removes all the crystals that weren't energized and it hardens the image so it'll last. A final wash gets rid of any leftover chemicals and boom, out it comes, a dry, ready-to-view X-ray. It really is like a precision chemical dance from start to finish. So, the two main players here are the developer and the fixer. And they have basically opposite but totally complementary jobs. The developer builds the image by turning exposed crystals black, while the fixer clears it by washing away the unexposed ones. Think of it like this. One reveals, the other preserves. You absolutely need both to get a clear, stable X-ray. No way around it. The film is out, and we have our image. But, to most of us, it just looks like a collection of black, white, and gray blobs. So to really get what we're looking at, we need to learn how to read this grayscale map of the mouth. And really, it all boils down to two key words, radio-opaque and radiolucent. Radio-opaque is the dense stuff that blocks X-rays and shows up as white or light gray. Think metal fillings or your bone. Radiolucent is the complete opposite. It's the less dense tissue that lets X-rays zip right through so it appears dark or black. We're talking tooth pulp, air spaces, and gum tissue. Okay, so let's put that into practice. If you look at a panoramic X-ray, you can spot these large, dark, or radiolucent areas above the top teeth. Well, that's the maxillary sinus. Down below, you might see the dark mandibular canal, where the nerve runs, outlined by those bright white, radio-opaque lines of bone. And that thick white band above the molars, that's your zygoma, your cheekbone. See, you're already starting to decode the map. This whole process is the science, and precision is absolutely everything. When you miss a step or get something wrong, the errors can be, pretty obvious. Let's take a look at a few common mistakes to see just how crucial every single step really is. Okay, first up is a classic operator error. If you feed films into the processor too fast, they can literally stick together. Where they overlap, the chemicals just can't do their job, leaving an unreadable dark splotch. And that means a whole section of teeth goes undiagnosed, often requiring a retake and more radiation exposure for the patient. This next one has a really distinct look. You see that perfectly straight white edge? That tells you that part of the film never even touched the developer's solution, usually just because the chemical level was too low. The latent image was there, all right, but without the developer, it never got revealed, leaving a completely blank and totally useless area. Oh, this one's a classic. Inside every film packet, there's a thin sheet of lead foil to absorb extra radiation. But if the film is placed in the mouth backward, the X-rays hit that foil first, imprinting its distinctive waffle pattern right onto the image. It's an instant giveaway of the error, and it can make the final image too light to spot anything subtle. And last up, if an X-ray comes out looking all yellow or brown, yeah, that is a huge red flag. This staining means the chemicals were old and exhausted, or the film wasn't washed properly. Not only does this obscure the details you need for a diagnosis, but the image will actually keep degrading over time, making it useless as a long-term record. For over a century, this incredible chemical process revealed a world hidden right inside our bodies and completely changed medicine forever. It was the foundation. So now, as we move to digital sensors, 3D cone beam scans, and even AI-assisted diagnostics, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other unseen worlds will the next generation of imaging reveal to us?
Have you ever wondered what your dentist is really looking for in those X-rays? You know, they're not just checking for cavities. They're kind of like detectives, hunting for hidden clues in this really complex three-dimensional space. So let's dive into how they solve one of their biggest mysteries.
First things first, our detective needs a map of the crime scene. And this panoramic X-ray, it's exactly that. It's a fantastic overview of your jaw, your teeth, pretty much everything going on in there. It shows us what's there. But just like any good map in a mystery story, it's hiding a crucial secret.
And there it is. Your mouth isn't flat, right? It's got depth. So how does a dentist use a totally two-dimensional image to figure out the exact location of something buried deep inside your jaw? Well, that is the puzzle we are going to solve today.
This gets us to the core challenge, what we call the flat image problem. See, a radiograph is just a 2D image of a 3D object. Think of it like this. It's like trying to figure out how far apart two people are standing just by looking at their overlapping shadows on a wall. It's tricky.
So, and this is the really crucial part, an X-ray can show a dentist that, yep, there's an impacted tooth or some foreign object, but it can't tell them if that object is closer to your cheek or closer to your tongue. And if you're a surgeon, that lack of depth information is a major, major problem.
So to start cracking this case, dentists need a different kind of view, a wider angle on the whole scene. And lucky for them, they have a specialized tool that gives them more context, a much bigger piece of the puzzle.
And here is that tool. It's called an occlusal film. Just look at how much bigger it is compared to the standard little films you're used to. Now, that size isn't just for show. It's designed to capture the entire upper or lower arch of your teeth in one single wide shot. It gives our detective a much broader view of the scene.
So what kind of clues are they hunting for with this bigger map? Well, all sorts of hidden stuff. We're talking about teeth that haven't come in yet, leftover roots from old procedures, foreign objects, even things like the true extent of jaw fractures. It is a super powerful tool for uncovering evidence that those smaller images might totally miss.
And this is what they get. It's a perfect bird's eye view of the entire dental arch. I mean, it's an incredibly clear, wide-angle image, but it's still flat. We still haven't solved our depth problem. For that, we're going to need a really clever trick.
So how do they finally add that third dimension? Well, they don't need a fancy 3D scanner. Nope. They use a simple, really elegant rule that relies on nothing more than a little change in perspective.
It's officially called the buccal object rule, and the secret is hiding right there in the description, 2 radiographs exposed at different angles. That's it. The entire solution, the key to seeing in 3D, is as simple as taking a second picture from a slightly different spot.
And how on earth do dentists remember this rule in the middle of a busy day? With this simple and, okay, maybe a slightly funny acronym, SLOB. SLOB stands for Same Lingual Opposite Buccal. Now, lingual just means on the side of your tongue, and buccal means on the side of your cheek. This little mnemonic is the key to unlocking the entire 3D puzzle.
All right, time to put on our detective hats and see how this SLBR rule actually works in practice. This is where a flat, boring image magically reveals its hidden depth. So the principle behind all of this is something called parallax. And you can actually see it for yourself right now. Go on, hold your thumb out in front of you. Now close your right eye and line your thumb up with something in the distance. Got it? Okay, now switch eyes. Close the left, open the right. See how your thumb appears to jump or move? That's parallax. And the SLOB rule uses this exact same effect. Okay, so check out shot A. The dentist takes one standard X-ray. On this film, those two objects, one near the cheek and one near the tongue, are perfectly lined up. They look like a single object. From this, you have absolutely no idea which one is in front and which one is behind.
But now, look at shot B. The dentist just shifts the X-ray camera, it's called the PID, or position indicating device, just a tiny bit to the side. And boom, look at the new film. The two objects don't line up anymore. They seem to have moved against the background of the teeth. This apparent movement, that is the crucial clue we have been looking for.
And here is how that one clue cracks the entire case. If the object appears to move in the same direction as the camera, it's on the lingual or tongue side. If it moves in the opposite direction, it's on the buccal or cheek side. Same lingual, opposite buccal, SLOB. Just like that, with two simple images, the puzzle is solved. The detective now knows the object's exact location in 3D. Pretty cool, huh?
Now, this technique is incredibly clever. But let's be honest, a detective is only as good as the quality of their clues. So to make sure all this evidence is reliable, there's a whole safety and quality control system working behind the scenes just to make sure every clue is crystal clear.
Because you can have the most brilliant detective with the cleverest rules, but they can't solve a case with faulty equipment or blurry photos. It's why the technology and the training behind it are so important. We're talking about diagnostic accuracy and patient safety here. They depend on this solid foundation.
This means all that behind-the-scenes work you never even see. Machines that are regularly inspected and calibrated, data that's backed up every single day, and operators who have documented training to prove they know what they're doing. It even includes a plan to minimize retakes, which is absolutely crucial for reducing a patient's exposure to radiation.
Ultimately, it all comes down to professional responsibility. This quote really says it all. The dentist is the one who is responsible for the quality and safety of every single image taken. It's a really serious commitment to patient care.
So the next time you're in that chair and you see that familiar X-ray image pop up on the screen, maybe you'll see it a little differently. Not just as a flat picture, but as one key piece of a clever 3D puzzle solved with a simple trick of perspective to see the whole hidden picture. You know that moment? You're sitting back in the dentist chair, you see that big X-ray machine swing over, and you just wonder, what is it really looking for? Well, it turns out your teeth have all these hidden stories to tell. We're talking about cavities that are just getting started or trouble brewing deep under your gums. And today, we're going to learn how to read those stories.
And really, it all boils down to this one question. I mean, why can't the dentist just look in there with their little mirror? The thing is, some of the biggest threats to your oral health are completely invisible to the naked eye. They're hiding in places a simple visual check could never, ever find.
And that's exactly where dental imaging comes into play. You should think of it like giving your dental team a superpower, X-ray vision. It lets them see right through your enamel and gums to all those hidden structures underneath, which is exactly where problems love to start. So what are they on the hunt for? It's not just about finding big, obvious problems. No, they're looking for those tiny, sneaky cavities just starting between your teeth. They're checking on the health of the bone that holds everything together, and they're spotting issues that might be lurking below the gum line. Seriously, catching these things early? That's the difference between a simple little filling and a much bigger, more complicated procedure down the road.
But here's something you probably don't see. Before that X-ray sensor even gets close to your mouth, there is a whole preparation process that happens completely behind the scenes. And all of it, every single step, is focused on one critical thing: your safety.
The absolute #1 priority here is infection control. And the goal is simple, but it's non-negotiable: to create a completely sterile environment for every single patient. This eliminates any possible risk of cross-contamination.
And just look at the level of detail that goes into this. Every single surface gets disinfected. They use single-use plastic barriers to cover the equipment. And of course, the radiographer puts on fresh gloves, a new mask, and protective eyewear just for you. This isn't a sometimes thing.
This meticulous process happens every single time for every single patient.
Okay, so the room is prepped, it's safe, and we're ready to go. What's the most common type of X-ray they take? Oh, it's one you've almost certainly had yourself. It's the classic bite wing. Yep, it gets its name from that little paper or plastic wing that you have to bite down on. And its job is super specific. It's designed to get a perfectly clear picture of the spaces between your teeth and also to check the height and health of the bone that's supporting them. This is so important because that's where the very first signs of bone loss from gum disease can show up.
Now, when they're taking a bite wing, the person behind the machine has one main technical goal that is more important than anything else. It's a concept they call open contacts, and getting it right can literally make or break your diagnosis.
Just look at the difference here. On the left, with open contacts, you get this clean, clear view right between each tooth. But on the right, those are overlapped contacts, and they create dangerous blind spots. A cavity could be hiding in that shadow, just growing and growing for months, maybe even years, completely undetected. You can see why getting this right is so critical for an accurate diagnosis.
So this brings us to a really important question. How can you, as the patient, have any idea if you're getting a quality diagnostic X-ray? Well, it's actually less of a mystery than you might think.
See, it's not just a matter of pointing and shooting. Taking a good X-ray is a real technical skill. It's all about angulation. The radiographer has to line up that X-ray beam perfectly with the angle of your teeth to get those clean, open contacts we were just talking about.
And when that angle is even a little bit off, you start to see errors. We've already seen how overlapped contacts can hide disease. A cone cut, that clear crescent shape you see, means a piece of the picture is just gone. It's missing. And the wrong vertical angle can make the teeth look all stretched out or squashed, which distorts what the dentist is seeing. Any of these errors could mean a hidden problem goes completely untreated, and that could turn a tiny little filling into a root canal.
But bite wings, they're really just one part of the whole story. To get a full, complete understanding of what's going on, your dentist needs more of a complete blueprint of your mouth.
A good way to think of it is like a map. The bite wing X-rays give you that detailed street-level view. But sometimes your dentist needs the satellite image to see the whole city, right? And that's where other types of X-rays come in. So, some other tools in their kit are the periapical X-ray, which shows the entire tooth from the crown all the way down to the tip of the root. That's perfect for spotting something like an abscess. Then there's the occlusal view, for seeing a big section of your jaw. And of course, the panoramic, which gives that incredible wide view of every single tooth, your jaws, and your joints all in one shot.
And this, right here, is probably the most important takeaway. There is no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to dental X-rays. It's not a routine. Your dentist uses their professional judgment to prescribe the exact images you need, based on your unique health history. It's completely personalized care.
So, the next time that heavy lead apron goes on, you'll know exactly what's going on and why it is so important. You'll understand the incredible safety prep that happens beforehand, the technical skill it takes to get that perfect shot, and the amazing detail it gives your care team. And it really just leaves you with one question to think about. What story are your teeth waiting to tell?
Today, we're learning how to read the hidden stories in dental X-rays. What looks like a simple black and white image is actually a really detailed diagnostic map. And by the end of this, you'll know the basics of how to read it.
So you've probably sat in that chair and seen those images pop up on the screen, right? To most of us, it's just a bunch of teeth in grayscale. But to a trained professional, they're seeing a whole story unfold. A map showing everything from bone density to problems hiding out of sight.
And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to break down that language of shadows and light so that you can start to see what they see and really understand the story that every X-ray is telling.
Okay, first things first. Just like any language, you gotta learn the basic words. For X-rays, that vocabulary is all about light and dark, or to use the technical terms, radiolucent and radioopaque.
Let's start with radiolucent. The easiest way to remember this is that lucent sounds kind of like see-through. These are the dark or even black areas. So why are they dark? Because things that aren't very dense, like the soft pulp inside a tooth or the air in your sinuses, don't stop the X-ray beam. It sails right through and hits the sensor, making that spot dark. And on the flip side, you have radiopaque. You probably guessed it. These are the bright white parts of the image. This happens when the X-ray beam hits something really dense, like your super hard tooth enamel, your jawbone, or a metal filling. That stuff blocks the beam, so less of it reaches the sensor, creating a bright white spot. So let's just boil it down. Radiolucent equals dark and less dense. Radioopaque equals white and more dense. Every single feature you see on an X-ray falls somewhere on this spectrum. Getting this simple distinction down is, without a doubt, the most critical first step to reading these things. So now that we know the language, how do we actually capture these images? Well, dentists use a whole bunch of techniques, but let's focus on two of the big ones: the big picture and the detailed close-up.
Here's a great analogy. Think of a panoramic X-ray as your satellite view. It gives you that huge, sweeping overview of the entire jaw, everything in one shot. It's fantastic for seeing the big picture, like where your wisdom teeth are. The paralleling technique, on the other hand, is your street view. It zooms way in on just a couple of teeth for a highly accurate, detailed picture.
And this table sums it up perfectly. The panoramic gives you that massive field of view, but the trade-off is you always get a little bit of distortion. Paradoppling, though, is all about accuracy, which is vital for diagnosis. Its main downside? Well, it can be a bit uncomfortable for the patient trying to get that little sensor placed just right. You know, getting that perfect panoramic image is a real skill, and it is so easy to make mistakes. So let's run through a few of the most common positioning errors and see exactly what they do to the final picture.
This one is a total classic. The patient slumps forward a bit, their chin drops. So, what does that do to our satellite view?
You get this crazy, exaggerated smile line curving up across the image, kind of like a smiley face. This makes the bottom front teeth look all blurry and just distorts the whole image, making it really tough to assess properly. All right, so what about the opposite? The patient tries to help by lifting their chin way up. Now you get a reverse smile line. It basically looks like a frown. The whole image flattens out, and the big problem is that you can lose sight of the tops of the jaw joints, which are super important to see.
Okay, this next one. This is by far the most common mistake in panoramic X-rays. The instruction sounds so simple, but it's really easy for the patient to forget.
When the tongue isn't pressed firmly against the palate, it leaves a big gap of air. And what do we know about air? It's radiolucent. So you get this huge dark shadow right on top of the roots of the upper teeth, making them pretty much impossible to evaluate.
One last thing to watch out for is called a ghost image. This isn't real anatomy, it's an artifact. Because the machine rotates around the patient's head, if they have on a dense object like an earring, the beam hits it twice. The result is a ghost of that earring that appears bigger, higher up, and on the opposite side of the actual object.
All right, we've got our vocabulary down and we know the techniques. Let's put it all together and go on a quick tour of the key landmarks you need to be able to spot.
We'll start with the dark, the radiolucent landmarks. You've got the incisive foramen, a little hole right between the top front teeth. Above the back teeth, you have that large dark space of the maxillary sinus. And down on the lower jaw, you'll find the mental foramen near the premolars. But watch out, this is often mistaken for an abscess. Finally, you can trace the path of the mandibular canal, that channel that protects a major nerve. And now for the bright radioopaque landmarks. You'll always see the dense cortical bone as that bright white outline of the jaw. If you zoom way in, the lamina dura is a thin white line that outlines a healthy tooth socket. The alveolar crest is just the peak of the bone between teeth. And a fun one to spot is the inverted Y, a white shape made where the floor of the nasal cavity meets the wall of the maxillary sinus.
So we've covered the language, the tools, and the landmarks. But why does any of this actually matter? What's the takeaway?
It's because when you can speak this language, an X-ray is no longer just a picture. It transforms into a rich, detailed story. You can see the history of a patient's health, and more importantly, spot potential problems long before they become serious ones. And this really gets to the heart of it. This isn't just about memorizing terms for a test. As the quote says, mastering this is the absolute foundation for accurate diagnoses and effective patient care. This is the bedrock of clinical practice. You now have the fundamental tools to look at these images with a brand new critical eye. You can start reading the shadows instead of just seeing them. So the real question is for you. Now that you can read the shadows, what stories will you uncover?
All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to become dental detectives. Our mission? To decode those mysterious black and white images you get at the dentist's office and uncover the secrets that are hiding in the shadows of your dental X-rays.
You know, every time you get an X-ray, you're looking at a map filled with clues about your health. But what do all those different shapes and shadows actually mean?
Well, together, we're about to crack the code.
Okay, first things first. Before we can solve any case, we've got to learn the language of the evidence. And in the world of X-rays, that language is all about shadows and light.
Look, every single X-ray really just boils down to a study in contrasts. The two most important words you need to know are right here. Radiolucent, which are the dark parts, and radiopaque, which are the light or white parts. Seriously, if you can get this simple contrast down, you've unlocked the key to everything else.
So what's radiolucent? Well, think of it like an open window. X-ray beams just pass right through things that are less dense, like air spaces or the soft pulp that's deep inside your tooth. This is also exactly why a cavity shows up as a dark spot. The decay literally eats away at the tooth, making it less dense. So more beams hit the sensor and turn that part of the image dark.
And on the flip side, you have radioopaque. This is the opposite. Think of a thick stone wall. Super dense things like your tooth enamel or fillings or solid bone, they block the X-ray beams. And since those beams can't reach the sensor, that area just stays white on the image. It's really that simple. The denser something is, the whiter it looks.
All right, so now we know the language, let's take a tour of the scene of the crime, which is, the normal anatomy of your mouth. Knowing what's supposed to be there is absolutely crucial for spotting something that isn't. When you look at an X-ray of your upper teeth and you see these giant, shadowy areas way up high, it might look a little alarming at first glance, but I promise you, it's a perfectly normal and really important landmark.
That's your maxillary sinus. And because it's basically just a big pocket of air, it's not dense at all. The X-rays sail right through it, and that creates that huge, dark, or radiolucent area on the film. It's a classic feature you'll always see on an upper jaw X-ray.
Okay, now let's head on down to the lower jaw. If you look real close, right around the roots of your premolars, you might spot a small, round, dark circle. Now that's not a problem. That is the mental foramen. It's a tiny, but super important, opening for nerves and blood vessels.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. This little hole is one of the most common red herrings in the world of dental X-rays. Why? Because an abscess, an infection, also shows up as a dark circle because it makes the area less dense. So this perfectly normal feature can sometimes look like a big problem. It's a perfect example of why knowing the map is so critical for any good detective.
A detective is only as good as their evidence. If the picture's all blurry or distorted, clues get missed. So let's take a look at what it actually takes to get a perfect diagnostic image.
In dental X-rays, getting the angle right is, well, it's everything. We're talking about the vertical angle of that X-ray machine. If the aim is just a little bit off, it can completely warp the image, making it pretty much useless.
So it all comes down to getting it just right. If the angle is too steep, you get what's called foreshortening, and the teeth look comically short and stubby. But if the angle is too flat, you get elongation, and the teeth look all stretched out, like something from a funhouse mirror. It's a real Goldilocks situation. It has to be perfect.
And then you've got this classic mistake, the cone cut. This is what happens when the X-ray beam isn't centered perfectly, and it leaves this clear, blank arc on the image. It's basically like putting a giant thumbprint right over your evidence, and it could be hiding the one thing you really needed to see.
So as you can see, getting that perfect, clear shot is a precise science. It's not just point and shoot, it's a whole four-step dance. First, the receptor has to be placed perfectly. Then, you have to nail the vertical and horizontal angles, and finally, the beam has to be centered just right. It's a real technical skill, and it all has to happen in seconds.
Okay, this is the moment we've been waiting for. We know the language, we know the layout of the scene, and we know what good evidence looks like. Now, let's start spotting some real clues.
One of the biggest stories an X-ray can tell is about the health of your gums and, more importantly, the bone that holds your teeth in place. The main character in this story is something called the alveolar crest. That's just a fancy name for the highest point of bone that you find in between your teeth.
So how do we know if that bone is healthy? Simple. We measure. In a healthy mouth, that alveolar crest should be sitting just about 1.5 to 2 millimeters below the line where the crown of your tooth meets the root. And this right here, this is where it all clicks into place. On the left, you see a healthy crest. See how it's bright white, radiopaque, and comes to a nice sharp point? Now look at the image on the right. You can clearly see bone loss. The crest is all blunted and flat, and it's moved way down the root. This is a telltale sign of periodontal disease, a clue that is completely invisible without an X-ray.
And what's the usual suspect for causing that bone loss? This stuff, calculus. That's just hardened plaque.
On an X-ray, it shows up as these little radiopaque spurs or jagged bumps on the sides of the teeth. Spotting this is like finding the weapon at the scene of the crime.
So, as we start to wrap up our investigation, it's pretty clear that a dental X-ray is so much more than just a picture of your teeth. It's a really deep, detailed story.
So, after all this, what's the real story these X-rays are telling us? What is the secret that's hidden in all these shadows and lights?
Well, we've learned that X-rays speak their own language of light and shadows. We've seen that our mouth is a unique map, full of important landmarks. We found out that getting that perfect shot requires some incredible skill. And most importantly, we've seen how these images reveal critical clues about our health that you just can't see any other way.
So the next time you're sitting in that dentist chair and an X-ray pops up on the screen, you won't just see a jumble of teeth anymore. You'll see a story, you'll see a map, and you'll see a set of clues. And now, you'll actually know how to start reading it.
Have you ever wondered how a super quick flash of light can tell this whole detailed story about what's going on deep inside your teeth? Well, today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to demystify the dental X-ray and go on this journey from a really complex machine to the crucial meaning it has for your health. Because, let's be real, when you look in the mirror, you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. The real story, the one that really matters for your health, is often hidden just out of sight, deep inside your teeth and jawbone. And we're not talking about small stuff here. I mean, we're talking about really serious issues. Cavities wedged between teeth where you'd never see them, infections brewing down at the root of a tooth, bone loss from gum disease, even things like impacted wisdom teeth, or in some cases, cysts and tumors. These are the kinds of problems the naked eye just can't see, and it's exactly why X-rays are so incredibly important. All right, so how do we actually do it? How do we take all of this hidden, invisible information and make it visible? Let's dive in. You see, the whole challenge, and really the genius of the whole thing, is figuring out how to translate the complex 3D reality of your mouth into a simple, flat 2D image. But it's an image that's just packed with diagnostic clues. It's kind of like creating a super detailed treasure map of a hidden landscape. So, how is this map even made? Let's take a look inside the X-ray toolkit. It really all boils down to some clever pieces of hardware and a pretty simple but brilliant principle of physics. And that principle is basically a language of light and shadow. You have two key words, radiolucent and radioopaque. Structures that are less dense, like your nerves or sinuses, they let the X-rays pass right through, so they show up as dark or black areas. That's radiolucent. But the denser stuff, like your super hard tooth enamel or a metal filling, that blocks the X-rays, so it appears bright white or radioopaque. The entire image is basically just a very sophisticated shadow play. First up, you've got the source of the magic, the tube head. And you should think of that cone thing on the end, the PID, as a highly focused spotlight. Its one and only job is to generate and aim that X-ray beam with absolute, pinpoint precision to get the perfect shot. Okay, so if the tube head is the spotlight, then the receptor is kind of like the camera film. It's that little device they place inside your mouth, and its job is to catch all those shadows being cast by your teeth and bones to create the final image. But think about it. How do you make sure the spotlight and the film are lined up perfectly? You can't just eyeball it, right? No way. That's the job of the beam alignment device. It's this clever little guide that holds the receptor steady and makes sure the beam hits it at the absolute perfect angle. This thing is the secret sauce to getting a sharp, useful image every single time. And this is where modern tech is just wow. It's amazing. Today's digital receptors are incredibly sensitive. This means they not only give you an instant image on the computer screen, but they can require up to 80, even 90% less radiation than old school film. I mean, that is a massive, massive leap forward for patient safety. So we've got the tools, but getting a good X-ray isn't just a matter of point and shoot. Oh no, it is a real craft. It takes a ton of precision, a lot of skill, and a deep understanding of what makes an image truly useful for a diagnosis. In fact, radiographers work off this super strict checklist. First, they have to open the contacts. That means making sure the tiny spaces between the teeth are perfectly clear so a dentist can spot hidden cavities. They also need to see the entire tooth, all the way from the top of the crown down to at least 2 millimeters of bone past the very tip of the root. And the image itself has to be perfectly balanced. It's a really high bar to clear for every single shot. And this quote right here, this just brilliantly shows the skill involved.
Sometimes, because of a person's unique anatomy, getting a perfect shot of everything just isn't possible. So what did they do? Well, professionals have a priority list. This tells us they will always prioritize getting that space between the big upper molars open, because that's such a critical area for cavities. It is all about real-time diagnostic problem solving.
Okay, now for the really fun part, learning how to actually read these ghostly images. I promise, once you know a few of the key landmarks, this hidden world of your own anatomy just opens up right before your eyes.
So, the basic key to decoding this all starts with the tooth itself. The outer layer, the enamel, is the hardest, densest part of your entire body, so it shows up as the brightest white. Right underneath that is the dentin, which is a bit less dense, so it looks more like a light gray. And then right in the very center, you have the pulp. That's the living nerve and blood vessels, which is the least dense part, and it appears as this dark channel running down the. But what about all the other shapes you see? For instance, people often spot this kind of ghostly, bright white, upside-down Y shape on X-rays, right above the canine tooth. What in the world is that? It's called the inverted Y, and it's a perfect example of how 3D anatomy can create a 2D pattern. See, it's not actually one single structure. It's just the point on the image where two different things, the bony floor of your nasal cavity and the wall of your maxillary sinus, happen to overlap. That overlap creates that really distinct white Y shape. Pretty cool, right?
Okay, ready for another one? On an X-ray of the lower jaw, you'll almost always see this really prominent dark band, kind of like a river flowing right through the bone. So, what's that? That river is the mandibular canal. It's a dark or radiolucent tunnel that runs inside the jawbone, and it is incredibly important because it's the protective housing for the main nerve and blood supply for all of your lower teeth. Knowing exactly where that canal is, that's absolutely critical for any kind of dental procedure in that area. So you see, learning to identify all these different shapes and shadows and landmarks, it isn't just some boring academic exercise. It is the entire foundation of how a diagnosis is made. It's why this all matters. Because once you have a perfect map of what normal is supposed to look like, that crisp white line of bone around the tooth, the consistent height of the bone between the teeth, any little thing that deviates from that normal just jumps right out at you. A little dark spot in the bright white enamel, a fuzzy dark area around the tip of a root. That's how problems are found.
So let's just do a quick recap. Number 1, X-rays make the invisible visible. They show us critical information we could never see otherwise. 2, the image is just a shadow play based on density. Dense things are white, less dense things are dark. 3, getting a good shot is a highly skilled craft that takes real precision. And finally, all those strange shapes and lines, they're just normal anatomical landmarks that tell the story of you.
So, the next time you're at the dentist and they put your X-rays up on the screen, you won't just be looking at some confusing black and white picture. You'll be looking at a map of your own health. And the question is, now that you know a little bit more of the language, what new details are you going to look for?
If you've ever been to the dentist, you've probably had those small, familiar X-rays taken, right? The little bite wings. But there is a whole other world of imaging that goes way, way beyond those. Today, we're going to take a journey into the bigger picture of dental radiology.
So on the left, you've got the one we all know, the close-up, the intraoral X-ray. It gives us a really detailed look at just a few teeth. But on the right, well, that's a whole different beast. That's a panoramic view. It shows us the whole shebang, every single tooth, top and bottom, plus the jawbones, the joints, everything.
So, okay, we get it. The small X-rays for checking a couple of teeth for cavities. But when, and more importantly, why, would a dentist need this massive all-in-one image? Let's dive in.
Well, it's really all about seeing the bigger picture. Sometimes, to figure out what's truly going on, a dentist has to zoom out, They need to see the entire structure of your jaws, your teeth, and even parts of your skull, all at the same time.
And this is exactly where extraoral imaging comes into play. It's used for so much more than just a cavity check. We're talking about the big stuff, like assessing growth for braces, hunting down those pesky impacted wisdom teeth, detecting diseases or lesions, checking out the damage after an accident. We're getting a good look at your jaw joint, the TMJ. It is the go-to tool for a full comprehensive diagnosis.
Now, to get this incredible big picture view, you can't just use any old machine. You need a pretty special piece of equipment. So let's meet the machine that makes it all happen.
This right here is a panoramic X-ray machine, and the real magic is in its movement. While you're standing perfectly still, the machine's arm, with the X-ray source and the sensor, rotates all the way around your head, capturing a complete view in one single smooth pass.
Honestly, this is the perfect way to think about it. The machine is essentially taking a 3D object, your curved jaw, and digitally unrolling it into a single, flat 2D image. It's like creating a detailed, fold-out map of your entire dental landscape.
So what's it actually like for you, the patient, to get one of these scans? Let's walk through the process, because it's all about getting the position just right.
Okay, first things first. You'll be asked to take off any metal from your head and neck, so earrings, glasses, necklaces, even removable dentures have to come out. And the reason is really simple. Metal blocks X-rays. It can create a bright white shadow or a ghost image that could hide something really important your dentist needs to see. Then it's time for positioning, and trust me, every single one of these steps is crucial for getting a crystal clear image. You'll put your toes on a line, hold onto some handles to keep your back straight, and bite down on a little plastic stick. Then you'll close your lips and, this one's super important, press your tongue flat against the roof of your mouth. And after all that, you just have to hold perfectly still for a few seconds.
And these pictures show a couple of those key steps perfectly. That line on the floor, that makes sure you're standing at just the right distance. And that little bite stick is what puts your teeth right into what's called the focal trough. That's the zone where the image is going to be the sharpest. Every little detail here really matters.
All right, the scan is done. You're left with this image of black, white, and gray shadows. So how does a dentist actually read this map and turn those shadows into a real diagnosis? Let's learn the two most important words in the radiology world. First up is radiolucent. That just refers to the darker areas on the X-ray. It's where the X-rays pass through easily, like through soft tissue or air. The other word is radiopaque. This refers to the light or white areas. These are dense things like bone, tooth enamel, or metal fillings that actually block the X-rays. Everything on an X-ray is just a different shade of one of these two. Okay, let's see it in action. Here, that green arrow is pointing to a very clear, dark, or radiolucent area around the top of an impacted wisdom tooth. That dark shadow tells us there's probably a lesion or a cyst that's formed in the bone there. The X-rays are just passing right through it. Now, let's look at the opposite. See, inside the green circle, it's highlighting a lesion that's mostly radio-opaque. It's bright white. This tells the dentist that something dense, something calcified has formed inside the jawbone, and it's solid enough to block the X-rays. Here's another fantastic example. The arrows are pointing to an almost perfectly circular radiolucent area in the lower jaw. I mean, it basically looks like a hole in the bone, right? Seeing a clearly defined shadow like this lets a dentist spot a potential problem deep inside the bone that would be completely impossible to see otherwise.
Now, the panoramic isn't the only type of extraoral image out there, not by a long shot. There are several other specialized shots, and each one is designed to give a very specific view of the skull and face.
First up, we've got the lateral cephalometric projection. Now that's a mouthful, so pretty much everyone just calls it a ceph. And this is an orthodontist's absolute best friend. It gives them a detailed side profile of the skull so they can evaluate facial growth and see how the jaws line up with the rest of the face. Then there's the posterior-anterior projection. This gives us that straight-on, front-facing view. It's fantastic for examining the skull for any disease, trauma, or developmental issues because it lets you see everything in perfect symmetry. And this view is called the Waters projection. You know what its main job is? To give a super clear, totally unobstructed look at the maxillary sinuses. Those are the big air pockets right behind your cheekbones. It's the perfect tool for checking out sinusitis or fractures in that specific area.
So we've seen how dentists can make a flat map of the jaw and take these special 2D pictures of the skull. But what if? What if you could see it all in 3 dimensions? Well, that brings us to the absolute cutting edge, cone beam computed tomography, or CBCT. This technology is a total game changer. It takes hundreds of pictures in just one scan and then uses a powerful computer to piece them all together into a fully interactive 3D model. And the level of detail is just incredible. With a CBT scan, a surgeon can plan the exact placement of a dental implant down to a fraction of a millimeter. An endodontist can navigate a really complex root canal. A dentist can look at any problem from every single angle imaginable. It basically takes all the guesswork out of the most complex procedures.
From a simple bite wing to a full 3D reconstruction, you can see dental imaging has come an unbelievably long way.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Now that we can literally fly through our own jaws in 3D, what's going to be the next frontier in how we see inside the human body?